Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. If you've listened to this podcast for any number of years, you would know I am a massive fan of James Cameron's Avatar. James Cameron's one of my favourite directors. He is more than just a simple filmmaker. He is an innovator, an explorer, and a true artist in every sense of the word. He redefines how cinema is made, viewed, and pushes the boundaries of what is technically possible. Every one of his films has pushed the technological and storytelling envelope. Terminator is probably the biggest and most ambitious independent film ever made. I know that wasn't James Cameron's first film, but it's technically his first big theatrically released film. He made Piranha 2, I think, but that wasn't his film. He worked on it and the director got fired and he took over to finish the film, so he didn't really have any control over the story because he had expressed interest in directing or he was familiar with cameras or something like that. I can't remember how that goes. But when you look back at Terminator, it is the independent film on steroids. It utilized a lot of cutting-edge visual and practical effects. There wasn't a lot of CGI in it. I don't think there's much CGI in it at all. I think all the futuristic scenes were all shot with miniatures and models. The practical effects in that film are amazing. Some are a little dodgy, like when he's gouging his eye out with a scalpel. It's obviously a prosthetic robot Arnold, but they were still pretty impressive for 1984 or 1983, whenever it came out. The T-800 skeleton was pretty revolutionary. I mean, this is a fair while after Star Wars had set the benchmark for what was possible when it comes to puppetry and models. I think the T-800 definitely takes it to the next level. Seeing that as a practical effect rather than just a CGI character is much scarier. It's much more intense. When you compare that to other films in the franchise like Terminator Salvation and Genesis and whatever the fuck the last one was called, Dark Fate, where the machines are pretty much all CGI, they're just not scary. They might move better, they might be able to do a whole lot of gravity-defying things, they might be able to jump around and be more threatening in terms of the action scene, but nothing is scarier than actually seeing a full-size, chromed, endoskeleton T-800 death machine. Nothing is scarier than seeing that practical, and T2 pushes the envelope again in what was possible with practical and visual effects. Terminator 2 focuses more on the visual effects side of things with the T-1000 and the liquid metal. But the practical effects in that film are some of the best I think I've ever seen. They're even better than some of today's practical effects. The bullet holes in Arnold, the missing arm, all that was state of the art. And it reset the benchmark for what was possible in terms of practical effects. That's what I really like about James Cameron's approach to filmmaking. He doesn't just favour one art form over the other. He blends both together. He utilises both forms of technology to tell the story. I love it when filmmakers do that. I'm getting very annoyed at just seeing purely CGI action scenes and films. I really love to see a return to practical effects like what Christopher Nolan's doing with The Odyssey and what he did with Oppenheimer. Special effects might be the easier choice and they might be cheaper in some regards, but nothing beats seeing something real on the screen. If you compare the Jurassic World to Jurassic Park films, Jurassic World obviously was not as good because there's an over-reliance on visual effects. All the raptors are just guys in green suits that are replaced at a later date with CGI. Now you compare that with the terrifying kitchen scene from the first Jurassic Park. That's all practical effects for the most part. There are some visual effects elements in it. But a lot of it is just guys in suits and puppets. Some of the more elaborate movement scenes are visual effects, but they are very good and they're not really obvious either, where it's very obvious with the Jurassic World films that nothing was practical, or there were very few elements that were practical. I think the last one, Dominion, has more practical elements in it, and it didn't work because the special effects looked so crap, and it was there as more or less fan service for the original Jurassic Park fans. They were nearly saying, well, look at this puppet Stegosaurus. But then 2 scenes later, there's a massive action scene where all the dinosaurs are visual effects. Anyway, that's kind of getting off topic. Back to James Cameron. So James Cameron is a man that doesn't do things by halves. He is an all or nothing type of guy. I'm assuming that. I've never actually met him. I would love to. But he doesn't do things by halves. Every project he seems to take on is epic to the point that no one else has ever thought about doing something as outlandish. But his unrelenting drive to have his vision brought to life is truly amazing, and it's something that has really been lost in Hollywood. He's willing to wait, to be methodical, to be strategic, to get his vision on the screen. He knows it's expensive, it's bold, and it's very risky, which the film studios are very adverse to risk these days. They've definitely got a cookie cutter formula that they've been pushing specifically in the last probably 20 years or so. You look at the rise of superhero films, everyone does them. Before that, it was vampire films. And there'll be another trend in a year or two where every studio is making basically the same film. But Cameron's drive to see his vision brought to life is something that is only seen once in a generation. Avatar has been a very long journey for Cameron. He's had the idea since he was about 19 or 20 years old. It's taken a very long time to get from his head to the screen. 2009's Avatar was the most expensive film ever made at the time. It was the highest grossing film of all time. I think it still is. It might have been overtaken by Avengers Endgame or something, or maybe one of the Harry Potters, but I'm pretty sure it is the first or second highest grossing film of all time. It was also the first film to really revolutionize 3D technology. It wasn't the first 3D film by any means, but it was the first big cinematic film to really utilize 3D as part of the artistry and the landscape of the film, and not just a gimmick to get people in the door, like pretty much every other 3D film that came afterward. If you remember back to those days, every single film was pretty much 3D. Well, every action, sci-fi, superhero film was, most of them anyway. And they were never that good. They had a couple of scenes that kind of popped out at you, but that was really about it. I remember those shitty 3D horror films where they had like an axe or a piece of glass flying out at the screen, but really the rest of the film was kind of normal. Avatar was one of the first films that really incorporated 3D into the environment, and it's a film that was made for 3D. And to this day, it's the only film I've seen that really does 3D right. The Way of Water, where they switched to that high frame rate 3D, wasn't as good. I saw it in a standard cinema. I didn't see it in IMAX or 4DX, whatever the fuck what they're up to now. I don't think the high frame rate 3D was as good as the Real D 3D. Real D 3D, yeah, it might have given you a headache after about an hour and 50 minutes, but it was definitely more in your face. It might have been slower, and it did have that kind of chromed tint to some scenes in Avatar, but I just thought that was part of the background. You notice that a lot more in the RDA scenes on the human base. I thought that just made the backgrounds pop a lot more and kind of added to the human flair of things. The high frame rate stuff I don't think is as good. It doesn't look as good. It might move quicker, and it doesn't give you the headache like the Real D 3D did, but I don't know, it doesn't pop as much. Where there were scenes in the first Avatar that were so groundbreaking, the water drop being the one that I keep referring to. Having that focus in the water drop right in front of your face was really fucking cool. It felt like you could touch it, and the things flying around. I didn't get that with The Way of Water or any of the other 3D films that came after Avatar in 2009. I saw Clash of the Titans in 3D, and I think really one of the few standout scenes with that was when the Kraken comes at the screen. You got a sense of like scale and size, but not much more. Probably the other most impressive 3D film was Titanic 3D that got released in 2012 for the 100th anniversary of the Titanic. That was really cool. You could tell they had put a lot of effort in to make it 3D. It didn't necessarily need to be in 3D, but it wasn't just some like cheap conversion. You could tell that Cameron had put some time and effort into converting it to 3D, because there was a lot of scenes in that were pretty cool, especially with the ship in the water, and when it was sinking, it got pretty freaky, having the water and coming right at your face. But anyway, back to Avatar. So Cameron doesn't do things by half. He is a man of epic imagination. Any project Cameron undertakes is so grand and so epic, it would scare most filmmakers from even thinking of a vision as big and unique as his. Yet this is Cameron's superpower. He seems to revel and excel in the epicness. There doesn't seem to be a project that's too big. It seems like a walk in the park for him. Spielberg and Ridley Scott are also masters of epic storytelling, but Cameron really goes to the next level. And not just in terms of the scope of the scale and scope of the story, but also the budget. He has made, I think, now 3 of the most expensive films ever made and 3 of the highest grossing films ever made. Well, 4 if you include Titanic. Epic is where Cameron likes to live. This is Cameron's real superpower. Telling epic stories on the big screen and getting people back to the theatre to experience it. Whatever technological innovation he pushes isn't a gimmick, it is part of the storytelling. So on tonight's episode, I will be reviewing the latest in the Avatar franchise, Avatar: Fire and Ash. After the review, I'll be breaking down the box office returns, production costs, challenges faced bringing Avatar: Fire and Ash to the screen, how much it cost Disney and Fox to produce, the future of the franchise, and much more. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's episode. This is episode 93 of the Truth Tank, Avatar: Fire and Ash review. So it goes without saying that Avatar: Fire and Ash is probably one of my most anticipated films of 2025, along with Predator: Badlands, A Complete Unknown, and a couple of other films. There wasn't a huge amount of films out this year that really interested me. There's a lot more I wanted to see in the cinema, but they didn't really have good times, and some things are just such a big gamble now, especially with cost of living. You really have to pick your films wisely. 2025 was also the year that I have been to the movies the least. I went to more concerts this year than I went to the movies, which is definitely a first. I think I only went to the movies about 10 times this year, and they were pretty much all for big action films, minus A Complete Unknown. Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning was another one of my most anticipated films. But by far the biggest draw for 2025 was Avatar: Fire and Ash. As I mentioned in the opening, I'm a huge Avatar fan. I love the franchise, I love the vision, I love the scope, the story and the scale of it. I love epic sci-fi when it's done right, and James Cameron is one of my favourite directors. Avatar: Fire and Ash is written and directed and produced and I think edited by James Cameron. It stars Sam Worthington as Jake Sully, Zoe Saldana as Neytiri, Stephen Lang as Quaritch, however you pronounce his name, as well as many others. Avatar: Fire and Ash is also 3 hours and 17 minutes long, so if you're wise, take lunch like I did. I put a funny Instagram post up when I saw it a couple of weeks ago. At time of recording, I packed a Vegemite and cheese sandwich. I saw the 11 o'clock session and it didn't finish till about 2:20, and that was a couple of days before Christmas. So I packed a sandwich and a muesli bar. This episode is also the first recorded episode for 2026, so Happy New Year. I hope all your goals and ambitions come to fruition, and a bit more peace, logic and common sense returns to planet Earth. By the time you hear this, it'll probably be February or March. Just before I get too far into the review, This episode will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film or intend to, stop listening now. I'll try not to give too much away, but I can't promise anything. So Avatar Fire and Ash picks up right where Way of Water left off, with the death of Jake and Neytiri's eldest son. They're still grieving his loss, as are the younger kids and the younger brother Loak, however you pronounce it. Right from the get-go, as the title suggests, Avatar Fire and Ash is very much a darker film in tone and more somber. There's a quite emotional opening to the film where Loak is reunited with his deceased brother in this flashback sequence. It's also the most obvious 3D scene. You do notice the very fast motion of the high frame rate in this particular scene. It takes a couple of minutes for your eyes to adjust to the high frame rate and get used to how quickly it moves. I did like the opening scene. It was emotional, and it does remind you of what had happened in Way of Water without providing a cheesy, cliched flashback. I thought it was a very original way to get audiences up to speed on what had happened. Obviously, if you've seen Way of Water, you're going to know that the older brother doesn't make it through. But if it's the first or the second Avatar film you've seen, you also know that the older brother is dead and Loak blames himself for it. So that was a very emotional way to kickstart the film, and it does set the very dark tone for what is to come. The Sully family is fractured. Jake blames Loak for the death of his eldest son. It's very early into the film. We are reunited with one of my favourite characters and the main antagonist of the series, Quaritch, played by Stephen Lang. Stephen Lang is brilliant as Quaritch, as he has been in the previous two films. I think he's one of the greatest and most underrated actors, or at least American actors. Lang is great in pretty much everything I've seen him in. He definitely embodies the dualistic nature of Quaritch's character. He's been reborn into the body of his enemy, but he's still a man on a mission at heart. And he's pretty much a company man. He's going to fly the RDA flag and do whatever it takes for him to complete his mission. Quaritch, more so than Jake and Neytiri, has definitely gone on the most dramatic and ambitious character journey in the films. He's gone from RDA Colonel being killed to being reborn in the body of his enemy, and pretty much picking up his quest to eradicate Jake Sully, picking up where he left off 15 years earlier in the first film. He's still the company man, even though he is 9 feet tall and blue this time. He might look like Jake in the Na'vi, but he's definitely a human at heart. And his character arc in this film is surprising, dramatic, and really fucking cool. All at the same time, you don't really know what you're going to get with him. Just when you think you've got this cliched character figured out, he surprises you time and time again. And the more the film progresses, the more changes Quaritch goes through, the more his personality changes and his direction. He starts off with wanting to catch Sully, to becoming obsessed with destroying Sully, but encountering Vorong along the way, and going a bit native himself, much the same way Jake did in the first film. Although Jake's attraction to living with the Na'vi is based on his curiosity for the native culture, but also for his love for Neytiri. Where Quaritch, on the other hand, it's more selfishly driven. Yes, he wants to complete the mission, but at the same time, he becomes interested in this more brutal Na'vi clan. He sees how he can exploit them for his own gain. His mission to bring in Jake Sully and the benefit of the RDA, but also to gain his own army. He's pretty much lost all of his troops from the previous film. He only has Wainfleet left. I think Wainfleet is the only original member of his of his squad that is still alive, and maybe one other. He or she gets killed pretty early on. So he needs a new squad to replace the ones that he's lost. And Vrong is providing the fanatical troops in order to do that. Pretty early on into the film, we are introduced to a new clan of Na'vi, the Wind Traders. Their leader is Pylek, played by David Thwells. You'll recognise the voice instantly. He's been in so many movies over the years. He's a great character actor. He played the werewolf in one of the Harry Potters, I'm pretty sure. The Wind Traders are a very cool addition to the world of Avatar. They have these gigantic flying manta rays and these massive, like, hot air balloon things. They trade with the clans all around Pandora and provide a lifeline to those clans that are spread out. They also travel around a bit, gathering bits of intelligence and goods to trade. But unfortunately, they're not really in the film a hell of a lot. I was hoping they were going to be in it a bit more, because I was really enjoying those scenes with the massive flying manta rays. And that design came from James Cameron. I think when he was 20 or 21 years old, he was driving a truck, and he drew this picture of a guy in a blue suit, or with blue skin, falling off of this giant flying manta ray thing with this hot air balloon behind it. And the Wind Traders are pretty much that picture he drew in his 20s, coming to life on the big screen 50 plus years later. And if you see the picture he drew and the final scenes, they're very, very similar. Nearly the same. So this is obviously an idea that he's had for a very, very long time. And I guess that should give everybody hope that if you haven't done that project that you wanted to do in life, there's always hope and there's always time to do so. Just don't give up and stick true to your vision. Okay, that's all the self-help I'm going to give this episode. So the Wind Traders were a very cool addition. They're trading with the Metakaina people on the coast. The adopted human child Spider has a much bigger part to play in this film too. We're introduced to Spider in The Way of Water. He comes into the film and goes out of it and comes back. He definitely has a much bigger role to play in Fire and Ash than he did in Way of Water. He's in Way of Water plenty, but there's a new focus on Spider, considering the older son is obviously not in the picture anymore. Spider has kind of taken over the older brother role, or the in-between brother. But there is a issue with Spider's mask. Him being human, he needs to breathe Earth's atmosphere. His air supply keeps running out. There's a scene early on where he's asleep and the mask starts flashing red. I can't remember if they flashed in the original one, or if that's a new addition to Fire and Ash. But there's a scene he's sleeping and then he starts to run out of oxygen and he's pretty much suffocating, and they have to find the mask in the tent, which gets a little dramatic. And from memory, I don't remember the exo masks running out so quickly, or really running out at all in the first one, because I guess the people don't go as far. Spider's out there in the jungle, living with Jake and Atiri. That was the first issue I did have with Fire and Ash, is that we haven't seen the oxygen bottle run out, and then within I think the first 25 minutes, his air supply is running out. So now there's this new threat of Spider running out of oxygen. So Jake comes up with a plan to send Spider with the Wind Traders to move him inland where he'll be safer. He's also been hunted by Quaritch. Spider is Quaritch's son. The Colonel also knows that if he finds Sully, he will find his estranged son. Jake wants to send Spider and I think some of the other kids away too, so they'll be safe. Jake is still on the ropes from The Way of Water. He's gone down to the big RDA ship to collect weapons for the upcoming war with the humans. He's kind of got to the point where he realizes that he has to fight. He can't just run away and try to protect his family. He is going to have to try to take he is going to have to take the fight to the RDA if he wants long-term safety for his family and the Metakaina people that he's living with. So Jake, too, is also at this weird crossroad where he's relying on his past as a Marine to try to keep everybody safe. Neytiri doesn't like using guns. She's traditional. She wants to use the bow. Jake says they use guns and rockets. It's not going to be enough to stop them because the people are not going to stop until they get what they want, which is the natural resources of Pandora. So Jake is definitely in this mindset where he is digging up the skills from the past as a human in order to save his Na'vi family. He is going to have to confront Quaritch and the RDA and make some personal sacrifices along the way in order to do so. So his plan is to send pretty much the alien adopted son, Spider, with the Wind Traders back to the human base up in the floating mountains to live with Norm and the other scientists that stayed behind from the first film. Norm is also another character that I really want to see more of. I thought he was a cool minor character. Him and some of the other scientists don't get enough screen time, I don't think. Norm is in this one a bit more than The Way of Water because he only really pops up like in the start and I think the end of it. So Sully thinks if Spider is living with his own kind, with Norm and some of the other humans, he'll be safer, he won't run out of air, and he'll be able to find backup masks and oxygen. It also gets him out of the way and out of trouble because Neytiri hates all humans pretty much. She just sees them all as this one gigantic plague that needs to be destroyed. As she says in the film, she hates the pink skins, she hates their faces and their hands and their greed. She definitely is going through a massive emotional change because Neytiri has pretty much been a pretty stable character throughout the franchise, and now we see this massive emotional change in her that's brought about by the death of her eldest son. She blames Spider and the humans, and she can't see past his pink skin pretty much. She views him as an alien and an outsider and one that is a threat that needs to be destroyed, and there's several times in the film where she thinks about killing Spider and just getting rid of him, and that's a theme that evolves over the very long running time of the film and comes back around later in the film. So the younger kids don't want Spider to go, so Jake comes up with another plan. He tells the kids, well, why don't we all go on a trip with Spider, then we can give him a proper goodbye. So they join the Wind Traders and go on a adventure to see off Spider. This is pretty early on into the film. This is probably like the 30-minute mark. And for a film that is 3 hours and 17 minutes long, the pacing of Fire and Ash is exceptional. There is no dead space in this film. There's no long, drawn-out scenes. Nothing feels boring or tedious. The film moves along at a very rapid-fire pace, much the same way Way of Water did. There's not a lot of getting stuck in scenes or, just drawn-out plot points or dialogue. There's a lot of fast, rapid-fire editing and action in this film, which I think is probably a deliberate thing too, and is very smart because it does keep the story moving along, and having it be cut and edited so quickly keeps the eye guessing and keeps you awake because you're always looking at these new colourful or dark backgrounds and scenes. The trip to the high mountains are some of the most epic and visually stunning scenes in the film. The flying manta rays with the sunset and the sunrise and traveling through the floating mountains are really impressive. I really wanted more of the flying manta rays. So Neytiri blames Spider for a lot of what happened in the second film. She blames pretty much his skin color and him being a human. on a lot of the things that she is thinking and feeling. She's definitely in a state of mourning. Jake, on the other hand, blames Loak, the second son, for the death of the older son. He cops a lot of Jake's wrath, and that relationship ultimately comes back around later in the film as well. He blames him for not listening. If he had listened and not returned to the boat, the older son would still be alive. But the RDA had the sisters hostage, and they were going to save the sisters. So Loak is very much like a human teenager. He doesn't listen, he's ambitious, he's impulsive, and he wants to do what he thinks is the right thing. And Jake is trying to instill in him discipline, because in Way of Water, he nearly gets his older brother killed as well, or it was vice versa. And that theme pops up again here. He loses his comm link necklace thing. Jake says to him, "Where are your comms? How am I supposed to talk to you and keep in communication if you don't have it? This is, one of the most important things you can have. We can't coordinate if we can't communicate." Which is obviously Jake's training as a Marine coming back into play. So the Wind Trader sequence is grand. It's a visual spectacle and a feast for the eyes. That did look cool in 3D. The images didn't pop quite as much as I was hoping they were going to. I think I'm going to have to see the next Avatar in, IMAX or something like that. But the 3D in this sequence was decent. You did really get a scope of... You did really get a sense of the size and scale of these things, because the manta rays are absolutely massive. It's also around here that we are introduced to the main antagonist of the film, Vorong, and her Mangwon Raiders, which are the Fire Clan. The Mangwon Raiders raid and pick on the Wind Traders. They're a pretty horrible clan. They cover themselves in ash, which you've probably seen from the trailers, and they paint themselves red and black. They have this greyish ash body paint. I think it's body paint anyway. There might be a slightly different bluey grey colour, but I'm pretty sure it's like an ash paint they cover themselves with. They are psychotic, and this is the first time we've seen a evil Na'vi clan, and I think it's one of the most interesting new additions to the world of Avatar. The RDA is also tracking the Wind Traders. They were following them with a surveillance vehicle where they spotted Jake and Spider. Quaritchers are alerted to Spider's presence and also where to find Jake. So he gets to kill two birds with one stone. So him and Wainfleet set out on the Banshees to intercept the Wind Traders. And this is where the first massive action sequence of the film comes into play. All these forces converge on the Wind Traders. The Mangwon attack the Wind Traders. Jake goes into protective Marine mode. There's a massive action scene. Neytiri and Vorong go at it. Neytiri is shot with an arrow and pretty badly injured. She falls to the ground. There's a very impressive scene of one of the air balloons blowing up. Jake's thrown off of it, off the top of the balloon, before he gets caught by his Banshee, I'm pretty sure, or he lands on something. Spider and Loak are on the balloon that is on fire, and he forgets his comlink again. He goes back to get it, but it's destroyed in a fire. The airships crash in very spectacular fashion. I did feel sorry for the flying manta ray because it's getting dragged down to the ground by the falling dirigible thing it's carrying. There's a cool scene of Loak climbing up the reins of this thing. Everything in Avatar is just so big on scale when you compare how big the Na'vi are to everything around them. You see the animals in this film, they're fucking huge. And when you see Spider next to Jake or Loak, it puts into perspective how small humans are on this planet and just how big the flora and fauna are. So things don't go well for the Sullys. The airship crashes. The family is separated. Natiri crash lands. She's injured badly. Jake is separated from the kids. Spider, Loak, Took and Kiri are separated by themselves. Loak has been using guns like his father. He isn't very good, but he is trying to be a protector and he's trying to keep his brothers and sisters safe. And he is still blaming himself for the death of his older brother. So he definitely wants to take this protector role and not let the past repeat itself. He doesn't want to let Jake down, and he's really trying to prove himself to his father that he can be a protector and a provider for the family. So this is a very cool, intense scene. I love this. This is probably one of the big highlights of the film for me. We've gone from the ocean to the sky to crash landing in the jungle and going back to Avatar 1. And that's another element that this film does very well. It blends all three landscapes we've seen in the previous films. It has the water element, which comes into play at various points in the film, but we also get to return to the jungle a lot more. In The Way of Water, it starts off in the jungle for about the first 30, 35 minutes of the film, 40 minutes, before they head to the oceans. There's a couple of scenes in the floating mountains, but not a lot. But a majority of Way of Water takes place along the coast and the beach, and obviously in the oceans, hence the name. The first Avatar was pretty much all in the jungle. This is a balancing act between the jungles, the oceans, the sky. The only element I think that really wasn't highlighted all that well in this film was fire and ash. I think that was the element that was most underused in the film, because the new clan is obviously the Fire and Ash clan. It wasn't elaborated or expanded all that much, and it was one of the more intriguing parts of this film, having this new, bad clan coming from this barren, inhospitable, fiery terrain, and it wasn't really utilized the way water and jungle and air has been in this film and in previous films. I thought there was a much bigger balance between the water and the jungle in this film, and the ash and fire kind of gets pushed to the side. It's brought into it a little bit, but it's not really touched upon all that much, because the importance of the jungle is explained very well in the first film, as is the importance of the water in the second film. And I did like this part of the film where we are literally crash landing back in the jungle, but we're seeing a different side of the jungle. It's not as nice as the first film. It's more of a rugged jungle with a lot more swampy areas. There's a lot more creeks and rivers. There's a cool sequence with a swamp, which we haven't seen before. Not as many wild animals in this one. We don't see the big animals from the first film, which I do hope they return at some point. It's a bit more of a desolate and creepy jungle. It definitely has a sinister vibe to it. So the family split up. Jake's looking for the kids. The kids are heading towards the crashed balloon, where they see the Mangwon raiders executing what's left of the Wind Traders. And I think the Wind Traders get a bit of a rough go in this film. They're not in it that much. They're only really briefly in it for probably 25 to 30 minutes, not even that, before most of them are killed and the rest of them scatter to the winds. And I really wanted to know a bit more about the Wind Traders. They wear these red coat things, which definitely look cool. They have these cool haircuts and jewelry, and we don't really get to find out much about them, so I'm hoping they return in future films as well. So the kids are watching the slaughter unfold and realizing how dangerous Varong and the Mangwon actually are. They are pretty brutal. You do get a real sense that Varong and her fanatical followers are just out to destroy pretty much anything that crosses their path. There's no real rhyme or reason with them. They just attack the Wind Traders more or less for the fun of it. There is a cool scene where she gives this order where one of her followers sets themselves and their Banshee on fire and flies straight into, basically kamikazes straight into the airship. So you get a sense that her followers are fanatical and view her more as more than just a clan leader and something more of like a demigod or some type of like religious cult leader. Varong was a cool character. She's scary. She also provides a counterbalance to Neytiri. These two characters are very much on opposite ends of the spectrum to one another. So while the chaos plays out, Quaritch and Wainfleet are sneaking up and tracking down Jake. They've landed in the jungle, where they first encounter Varong and the Mangwon. It's not too long after they come across Jake Sully, and Quaritch takes Jake into custody. This is a really cool scene too, because they haven't had a lot of interaction, not since the end of the second film. They don't really meet each other a lot in the way of water, except for really the end of it, where they have the big fight. And like a lot of things in this film, it all ties back into the first film. So Quaritch and Wainfleet march Jake out of the jungle, where they come across Varong and her Mangwon raiders. Jake explains that he needs to get to the kids, Spider's among them. But it's too late. The Mangwon have already found Spider and Jake's kids and surrounded them in the jungle. This is a pretty intense scene too. It's not like it's a horror film or anything, but you do definitely get this feeling of threat and dread, because this is our first big introduction to Varong and how fanatical and insane she really is, and how big of a threat she can pose. The kids are surrounded. Jake and Quaritch have snuck up on the group and seen that both their sons and their kids are at risk from Varong. And this situation is going to require both of them in order to get out of it. So Jake and Quaritch put aside their differences for the time being and work together like the good old days. Quaritch cuts Jake free. Jake gets a knife, I'm pretty sure, and they encircle the Mangwon in order to save their kids. So Varong is performing this fire ritual. They're doing this fire dance when Quaritch and Jake sneak up on them. Wainfleet is providing cover from afar, as he is the sniper. The fire dance scene is pretty cool. She has this pipe thing where she puts this like a hallucinogenic powder on it. It's basically a hallucinogenic drug, in other words. And she gets her followers to basically put the pipe near their face, and she blows the powder into their face, which basically gets them high, which is how she is so influential to her followers. She's pretty more or less controlling them through mind-altering substances to a degree. And this is where Quaritch and Jake sneak up on him. Quaritch takes her hostage. He's got the situation handled for a moment. You think he's about to take the kids and get out of the situation safely, until Varong does this Navi mind meld where she connects her tail thing to Quaritch's, and she has this bad evil vibe, and she corrupts the minds of whoever she comes into contact with, because she starts to control Quaritch after that, until Jake saves the day. They grab the kids and they flee into the jungle while being pursued by the Mangwon. This is a really fucking cool scene too. It's one of my favorites. The film now turns into this colorful sci-fi chase film through the jungle at night. It's very cool. They're on the run. Jake and Quaritch are working together again, and they need each other in order to survive. Wainfleet has retreated. The Mangwon have found him, and he's forced to flee in another direction. So Quaritch and Jake and the kids are making their way through swamps and rivers, all the while being pursued by Varong and her tribe. So the kids come across a river. They make it to safety. Not too long after, they're joined by Jake and Quaritch, and they rest for the night. I mean, honestly, the rest of the film could have been like this, and I would have been happy. I thought it was really cool having Jake and Quaritch reunited again and not be enemies for a little while. It was very nostalgic from the first Avatar, because I like both characters, Jake and Quaritch. They're both opposite ends of the spectrum, much the same way Varong and Neytiri are. But there's a more personal connection with Quaritch and Jake. Obviously, Jake started out being human, working for Quaritch and the RDA to try to provide information on the Na'vi home tree. Quaritch can't get past Jake's betrayal. He thinks Jake has betrayed not only him but his species, and he cannot forgive it, despite the fact that he's been awoken in the body of his enemy and he's no longer human. This is the first time that Jake lets on to Quaritch that the world of Pandora is a lot more mysterious than previously thought. My memory might be a little shaky because I saw the film a couple of weeks ago. And there's a key point that I did forget to mention. It's during the chase scene that Spider's mask is running on empty and he basically runs out of oxygen. Loak has to carry him because he's breathing heavily, which is using all his oxygen. So the stakes have been elevated because the kids and Quaritch and Jake get separated. They both go their separate ways because they're being chased by the Mangwon. The kids come to a clearing where Kiri starts to connect to Awa. Kiri I haven't mentioned too much, but she is a more central character in this one, and you can tell that she's going to play a larger part in the future films. She seems to be this conduit between the human world and Awa. She's very much a spiritual character, and she can connect to Awa in a way other characters haven't been able to. The only problem is that she seems to get overloaded and can't disconnect. And if she does it underwater, it might kill her. That happened in The Way of Water, and it's something that happens again in the start of Fire and Ash. But Spider is dying, so she sees no other way. She connects to Awa. Awa overtakes Spider and gives him the ability to breathe the air in Pandora without a mask, making this another first in the film. Spider can now breathe the air, but the Mangwon soon catch up with them. And it's a scene too where you think, could you find a safer spot to try to do this? But at the same time, he is dying, so they don't have any choice but to stop. So the kids get out of danger. I can't remember if Jake rescues them or if they just get out of it themselves, but they cross the river where they're reunited with Jake and Quaritch, and they bed down for the night. Jake's amazed that he can breathe without the mask, as is Quaritch. He sees this happen. And early the next morning, a group of Banshee riders find the group, led by Neytiri. Neytiri finds her Banshee in the jungle and escapes before encountering the Mangwon. She's pretty badly injured. She's got an arrow through the shoulder. She can't fire a bow, and she's in a pretty bad state. But she comes and rescues Jake and the kids. Quaritch retreats. I was kind of hoping that he was going to stick around and maybe join Jake, because this is one of the first points where his character starts to change and he starts to go a bit more extreme, and you think he's going to come around and forgive Jake, but no, he only doubles down later on in the film. But his character is changed by his encounter with Jake and Varong. The Sully family is reunited. Loak gets the blame again, even though he was trying his best to just protect his siblings. Neytiri is injured and she needs to recover. And talk about the characters going through big personal arcs. Neytiri is no different. This is the first time we've seen Neytiri vulnerable, and I think she is scarier in Fire and Ash than the previous two films. She's hurt, she's on the ropes. She's not just physically injured, she's been emotionally injured by the death of her son. The family's been splintered. She blames Spider, Jake blames Loak. So the Sully family isn't in the best of shape. And Neytiri's vulnerability, I think it actually even makes her a stronger character because she's able to come back from it. There's a not so much a montage, but there's several scenes of her trying to rebuild the strength and fire her bow. Her father's clan bow was broken in Way of Water. Loak retrieves it and he's trying to fix it for her. But she says only the leader of the clan can carry the bow and it's broken, so it's useless. But she's still trying to use a bow, even though the option to use a firearm is there, which is obviously easier in her current state, but she doesn't want to give in to the human technology. She despises humans so much she can't even use their technology, even if it does give the Na'vi more of a fighting chance against the RDA. And I tell you what, James Cameron can write some of the best female characters. I think he writes the best female characters: Sarah Connor, Ripley, Rose, and now Neytiri. He's got the trifecta of strong female sci-fi characters in Ripley, Sarah Connor, and Neytiri. And I wish others would take a leaf out of his book. If you want to write really believable female characters, and not just female characters, any character, you got to make them believable, likable, vulnerable, because that makes them more human. And Neytiri's vulnerability, I think, makes her a lot more relatable, because she's pretty much just been a non-stop killing machine in the first two films. She's a very fierce character. She's one that's going to stand up for her family. I always like it when she says, "My Jake," because she is a very passionate individual. She's willing to kill and fight in order to protect what she loves. And she hasn't had the easiest time either. Her entire world has been upended by the humans. But at the same time, her family, her husband, and pretty much her entire life has been evolved by this human character that has strayed into her life, being Jake. And like they mentioned in the second film, imagine if she had shot him before Awa intervened, because their story, well, the Jake and Neytiri love story is very, very much a story of destiny and literally star-crossed lovers. And it is funny how she's at this point in the story where she hates human beings so much she can't see past Spider's exterior. She can't see that this is their adopted son that has been living with them for 20-something years, or 18 years or whatever it is. She can't see past the fact that he is human. He'll always be a human to her. But at the same time, like Jake says, I am a pink skin. I'm a human inside. I might look like you on the outside, but I'm still a human being. Which is a bit of a point of contention for Neytiri. She hates Spider because he's human, because he looks like one, but she loves Jake because he looks like her. So does that make Neytiri a racist? Is she letting her personal feelings cloud her judgment at the bigger picture? Because she accepts Jake more because he looks like her now, but Spider represents the alien invader that needs to be exterminated because they're a threat to her people, even though Spider is not. So at this point, Quaritch's journey takes a very dramatic turn. There's some cool scenes in the RDA base that's expanded more in this film, and he comes up with this pretty extreme plan to turn Varong into an ally. He tells Wainfleet that he's got a plan, but it's a pretty extreme one. He doesn't run it by the general. He goes around her back, which is the first time we've seen Quaritch really break ranks. So his character is at this point now where he is either not believing the humans can get the job done properly, or the general isn't willing to do what needs to be done in order to accomplish the mission. Now, is this a bit of arrogance on Quaritch's part, or is it the experience that he's been in the field more than anyone else has, and he knows how Pandora works and how to exploit the resources around him in typical military fashion? So the plan involves Quaritch traveling to the scorched landscape of Varong's home in order to convince her that her and her people should basically become his private army in order to accomplish his mission of stopping Jake Sully. That does align with the RDA interests, but at the same time he's gone behind the general's back and he's going a little bit rogue. And this is the first time we've seen him break from the structure and the order of the RDA. He's breaking orders, and this is a Korean military guy, so that's might seem like a minor character adjustment on the surface, but it is much deeper than that. But Quaritch's arc, while it's extreme and dramatic, is also very clever because it keeps the audience guessing to what he's going to do next. His character this is probably like maybe an hour and a half into the film by this point. Vrong hasn't really played a huge part of the film yet. So Quaritch is still definitely the main antagonist of the film. But the way his character is written is so well done, it really does keep you guessing what the fuck he's going to do next. He goes from obedient RDA colonel, from towing the party line, to now breaking orders, coming up with his own idea, and traveling to the home village of this fearsome new tribe in order to recruit them into his own, more or less like an insurgent army. They're not really part of the RDA, but are kind of backed by them. Quaritch's arc is definitely a very interesting one, and it's one that is probably the most dramatic character arc I've seen in any film for a very long time. I think one of James Cameron's most underrated aspects of his films is his writing ability, because he is one of the fucking greatest writers, I think, in the history of cinema. His ability to write these realistic and compelling characters is, especially in the modern day, is unique, because there aren't a lot of films of this scale, the big blockbuster sci-fi film, where the characters have so much depth and characterization, minus the Dune films. And I would really like to see superhero films especially, but action and sci-fi films, take another leaf out of Cameron's book and really invest in character development. The Marvel films are the one exception where you have a character whose arc spans multiple films. But at the same time, in recent years, Marvel has really dropped the ball on their characterization. And that might have been the only good part of Thunderbolts, was the characterization of Yelena and a few of the others. Tony Stark and Captain America's arc are probably the most interesting. How Tony Stark has gone from the pretty much the playboy wanker to being the savior of humanity and willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. I just wish Marvel would go back to what made their stories special in the first place, where they invested the time to tell stories properly and grow these characters over several films in the build-up to the Avengers and into a bigger, more expanded MCU. DC, in my opinion, does this better than Marvel on an individual level. I think the development and story arcs of characters like Batman and Superman are done better in a single film than Marvel, but Marvel's long game plan is better than DC's until the James Gunn era. Because Zack Snyder had plenty of time to do it with the Snyderverse, but it never really materialized. There was some moments of hope. Man of Steel does a good job of retelling the Superman story, but James Gunn's Superman does a good job of telling the Superman story also, but from a outside of the box perspective. It doesn't do the whole, he's a alien refugee coming to Earth to live with a Midwestern family before discovering his superpowers, where Snyder's Man of Steel kind of resets the bar in his own interpretation of it, where James Gunn kind of hits the ground running and you drop straight into the action. Both are cool and interesting ways to tell the story, and I guess time will tell if James Gunn's plan pays off and he actually had an overarching long-term plan. But enough about that, back to Avatar. So Quaritch journeys to the fiery heart of Vrong's lair to convince her to join his cause. This is a very intense scene. You see this burnt, ashy landscape in the shadow of a massive volcano. Vrong reveals her backstory and how Awa turned her back on her people. Their home was destroyed. There's the remnants of an old giant home tree that is basically just a burnt skeleton of what it once was. It's a desolate landscape and very different to what we've seen on Pandora. There's not a lot of life. It's very dark and muted, and it's a far cry from the colourful jungles and oceans that we have seen. I was hoping Varung's backstory might be a bit more in-depth, or we get some type of a montage of what actually happened. I guess the point was for her to tell the story. Varung's character is very manipulative, so you don't really know if what she is telling Quaritch is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So Quaritch comes bearing gifts in order to convince her. He tells her that he'll give her RDA firearms if they join. Varung has recently discovered what human weapons can do and how powerful they are. She finds that out in the jungle when she has the connection with Quaritch. So he's playing on that. She wants the guns, he knows she wants the guns, and he can provide them. So this lures Varung into Quaritch's plan. She invites him into the tent where we get a bit more backstory into who Varung is. It's a pretty eerie and disturbing village she has. There's lots of skulls and bones everywhere. It's very cryptic. Her tent is pretty much the same thing. And this is where she blows the hallucinogenic powder into Quaritch's face, and he goes on a bit of a DMT trip in the tent. And once again, very different side of Quaritch. This is the first signs of him going native and really turning his back on the RDA and becoming more like Jake, where he's now aligning himself with this native culture because he likes the way they do things. The more violent, brutal aspect of the Mangwon tribe aligns more with Quaritch's past and how he views things. So Varung and her raiders are on board. They take the guns and are now working for Quaritch. And now the stakes are really raised. This just puts the drama and emotion up to about 10 now. And this is probably about halfway through the film, and you just know that things aren't going to get better. The conflict is definitely brewing, and Jake and Atiri might be in some real trouble. So Quaritch and Varung start interrogating tribes along the coast in order to try to find and draw out Jake Sully, much the same way Quaritch did in The Way of Water. They start burning villages. The biggest criticism I have with this scene is that I don't really think the Fire Clan is really well explained. Varung's backstory and the backstory to the tribe is touched upon, but it's not really gone into in that much detail, and I really wanted a bit more explanation because it's a decent way into the film, and Varung really hasn't had too much of an impact. This is the first time where you really see what a cunning and brutal character she can be. She's obviously manipulated Quaritch twice now. He thinks he's manipulating her, but she's also not stupid. She's getting something out of the deal. She's not going to let herself just join some cause she doesn't really care about. And obviously she's getting the guns out of it. But at the same time, she sees something in Quaritch that she either wants or needs or can use. And I don't think that aspect of her was really that well elaborated on. And I did want a bit more backstory to her and the Fire Tribe. So Quaritch has got his army, and now he is going to go interrogate and persecute villages along the coast in order to draw out Jake Sully and find Spider. And this plays out much the same way it did in The Way of Water, and unfortunately, this is a little bit of a pattern for Fire and Ash. It does have this repetition from The Way of Water. The connections to Avatar so far have been fine. They haven't really been repetitive. I think that was more of a natural progression with the characters, going back to the origins of the story and where we first met these characters, because that's done in a more subtle way. There are a few scenes in this film that are very reminiscent and sometimes nearly the same as The Way of Water. And this is really the first time where we've seen pretty much nearly identical scenes to The Way of Water play out. at nearly the same point in time as the second film. And that's the real big problem with Fire and Ash, is the formatting is very much like The Way of Water. The layout is not exactly the same, obviously, but it is very similar to the way the story for Way of Water was laid out. And this is the most obvious direct copying of a scene from The Way of Water. And while it makes sense in the whole grand scheme of the story, I was hoping for a bit more originality, because he has this fire tribe, so there was a chance that they could have gone to a different location, or it could have been done in a slightly different way. It still does work, but when I was watching it, I was thinking, well, this is kind of what happened in The Way of Water. The only difference now is that he's got the RDA, but he's also got the Mangwon doing his dirty work for him. The other issue is that Quaritch is now firmly the bad guy again, much the same way he was in The Way of Water. Now, that worked in The Way of Water because the Colonel's back, he's in this new body, and you needed a main antagonist for the film. The only issue is this destabilizes Varong's story, because she's now pretty much a henchman. She's playing second fiddle to the Colonel. She's like the attack dog with her tribe, and her characterization is kind of pushed to the back burner, because this is Quaritch's mission. Obviously, it doesn't really concern Varong. She's just there because she joined Quaritch, and Quaritch is following the orders of the RDA to bring in Jake Sully to stop the attacks on the RDA so they can strip mine the planet. But the interesting thing here is Quaritch has now gone from following orders to becoming completely obsessed with bringing in Jake Sully. So much so that, in a way, he is kind of going around the orders and using Varong and her people to do their dirty work, because the general hasn't signed off on him going completely rogue and just recruiting his own army. He still has protocols and orders to follow. And you do see this change in Quaritch where he is going native, but he's also disobeying direct orders, even though his orders were to stop Jake Sully and to bring him in. He's at this crossroads where his character could go either way, and that's what made him so interesting. But at the same time, that does destabilize Varong's character arc, because she is now this second fiddle henchman. So this leads to a very dramatic scene involving the Medicaian, Jake and Neytiri facing off against Quaritch and Varong and her army, backed by the RDA. Varong's people all have these RDA tags that prevent them from being shot down by the turret guns in the city. You get to see more of the RDA city. It's obviously come a lot further than it was in The Way of Water. It's a lot more industrialized. They've cleared the land. There's refineries and thousands of people in the city now. Quaritch leads Varong and the Banshees over the walls into the city. So the standoff is pretty intense. It takes place on the beaches of the Medicaian village. There's the big gunships backing up Quaritch. It is a very intense scene, and it's one that could get ugly pretty quick. So Jake does the noble thing and turns himself into Quaritch in order to save the village and his people. There's a cool scene involving Neytiri firing an arrow in between the Colonel's legs. She is fucking ferocious, and she has a look on her face like she's just going to get the Colonel back for everything that he's done. Jake turns himself over to Quaritch. Quaritch finally has his prize. The peace is kept, and Quaritch takes Jake back to the RDA city and turns him into the general, which was a very cool scene. It was very original, and this is probably like halfway, maybe over halfway in the film, and all of a sudden the hero gets turned in to the bad guys. Jake has finally been captured and been brought in. There's a cool scene of them landing in the city, and this big car containing the general comes out. It looks like the troop carrier from Aliens. In fact, like if you painted it green, olive green, it could be in an Alien film and you wouldn't even notice. James Cameron definitely has a style to these films because, like I said before, the RDA are interchangeable with the Colonial Marines. The technology is very similar. The look is very similar. The Dragon gunships could just as well be in Aliens because the Alien dropship looks pretty much the same. It has that same style to it. And this is where we get the first meeting between General Ardmore, played by Eddie Falco, and Jake Sully. This is the first time the pair have met. Sully is arrested. Thousands of RDA workers come out and get their, well, I don't know if they're their mobile phones, but they get cameras out and they start filming Jake, which was kind of cool. It's a little nod to like where we are as a society, where everyone has to just gather around and film the event rather than experience it. So everyone's filming and taking photos of Jake while he's being led into custody. It's also the moment where the general realizes that Quaritch has crossed the line. This is the first time she is introduced to the Mangwon Raiders because the troops on base are pointing guns at him. And he says, no, these are friendlies. These are with us. They helped us bring in the fugitive Sully. The general isn't exactly pleased by Quaritch's actions. Quaritch replies, just take the win, General, put on a show for the cameras. The job has been done. But you can tell there is this tension and conflict brewing among the RDA, which comes to a head later in the film. So Jake is put on display in basically a giant perspex box in the courtyard of the city under armed guard. There's thousands of people taking photos of him. There's news reports saying, we finally got him, Jake Sully captured, which is also another nod to modern media. It was very reminiscent of media coverage we see here on planet Earth, where an enemy of the state is brought in. One example would be when Osama bin Laden was killed. It was on every news station and newspaper in the world. The media always chooses to show a bunch of fucking morons who had nothing to do with it, jumping up and down, celebrating, saying, we got him, we finally got him. So, did you? What did you do? You just had some mouth-breathing moron jumping up and down in a park somewhere, celebrating Americanism, I guess, that America defeated this guy that had been living in a compound somewhere. So there's a very similar vibe here. You see the headlines going around the screens in the RDA city, and I'm guessing that was beamed back to Earth, that this insurgent leader, Jake Sully, was finally brought into custody. There's also a very original part of Jake Sully's story too. He hands himself in, because Jake Sully in the first film would never have done that. And it shows this progression of the character 2 films later, that he's willing to sacrifice himself in order to have a chance at saving his family. Now, joining Jake in the RDA base is Spider. I can't quite remember how he ends up there, but he is not taken prisoner, but Quaritch gets him and informs the RDA that he can breathe, so they're doing a whole bunch of experiments on him to find out why he can breathe the atmosphere. The RDA discover that Awa has a symbiotic relationship with Spider. Awa has transferred, I don't know, how do you explain it, like, has used some type of spiritual magic to transform Spider's cells into adapting to the Pandoran atmosphere. This part isn't overly explained, and I would have liked a little bit more explanation, because the whole time you're thinking this kind of just sounds like magic. But if you're familiar with the first films, it's basically the same thing that happens to Jake when his body and his avatar are brought to the tree, and Awa transfers his consciousness from the human body into the avatar, making the connection permanent. The RDA is doing a lot of tests on him, and I reckon there's a cameo from James Cameron. There's a surgeon that sounds like James Cameron and looks like him, who's doing the experiments on Spider. Now, while we're getting a good look at the RDA base, it's a bit more elaborate than it was the first time around. There's a lot more advanced holographic maps around the place. We're reintroduced to 2 of the most loathsome characters from The Way of Water. Dr. Garvin, played by Jamie Clement, and everybody's favourite space whaler and my most hated character, Scoresby, played by Brendan Cowell. I was thinking, how the fuck did he survive the first film? Because he gets his arm ripped off and he goes flying, the boat crashes onto rocks, and you just assume that he drowned, but it turns out he didn't. He's got a mechanical arm. Dr. Garvin isn't as bad, but his moral complacency makes him a bit of a villain. It's around this point too that the human conflict starts to ramp up. There's elements within the RDA that don't agree with each other. It's also this point in the film where we are reunited with one of the film's original characters. He's a bit of a prick, but he was likable even though he is a greedy corporate shill pretty much. And that is Selfridge, played by Giovanni Ribisi. And if he was played by anybody else, I don't think he would be half as likable. He makes a brief appearance in The Way of Water where he explains to Quaritch about the memories and the conscience transfer. I didn't read the cast list before I saw the film, so I didn't know Giovanni Ribisi was going to be in it. It was a very nice surprise, because I really did think that Selfridge should make a comeback, and I was hoping he was going to be in the second one, because he was like the corporate prick that was driving the whole RDA to like plunder the planet for resources so he could take it back to the corporation so they can make money on the stock market. He was the embodiment of human greed, and I really think that he probably should have been in the second one, because that whole story has continued, but it's a different face, with Scoresby's like the face of the whalers, where Selfridge is pretty much the face of the RDA. He's the boss, I'm pretty sure. He was the guy calling the shots in the first one. Did think he should have made an appearance in Way of Water to have that connection, but it was nice to see him back. The only issue is he is massively underused. Giovanni Ribisi is a great actor. I really think he should have come into the film at the start of it. It is a cool surprise halfway through the film, but this is probably well over an hour and a half at this point, probably an hour and 45 minutes. So this is the point where most normal movies end. He's coming into it. I just would have liked more of him, because I think he is that big connection to the corporate world. His allegiances are tied straight back to Earth, and he was that ruthless prick in the first one, and you just don't get a lot of that this time, because there's so many characters in this now. You have Scoresby's the head of the whaling division, and there's all these conflicting interests that are going on, and that's also where this interesting subplot with the human conflict comes from, because Selfridge butts heads with the general. The general's in charge of security, and as he reminds her, you're not the top dog in charge. Selfridge is. He's the head of the RDA. He reports back to the chairman. The chairman is the person that oversees the whole operation and pays for everything. He mentions the chairman of the RDA, which is very interesting. I can't help but think that this might be the overarching villain in the next few films, and they're going to bring the top dog of the RDA to Pandora to try to get things back on track. So that was interesting. They're setting up a little Easter egg for the next one, who might be the big bad guy. So there is this human power struggle between the top level players for the humans. Selfridge is not taking any bullshit from the general. The general's not taking any of his corporate shit, and they both have their agendas. And then you have Quaritch on the sideline, who's kind of in both worlds now, because he's going more native, but his allegiances are still with the RDA, which is very interesting. But so far he's been quiet while this conflict's going on. He's more interested in Spider. So while this is going on, Natiri hatches a plan to save Jake. She also goes rogue, and she dispatches a couple of Mangwon warriors, takes one of the RDA identification tag things, paints herself like a Mangwon warrior, and heads to the city in the attempts to save Jake. And talking about the corporate resources plot, which was one of the big plots of the first film, the resources plot in this one is a little bit underdeveloped. Bringing Scoresby, Dr. Garvin, and Selfridge back into it was cool, and I was expecting Scoresby and Gavin to come back, but not so much Selfridge. The only problem with this now is we assume there's these two resource plots going on, one for the unobtainium and the other for the space whale head oil. The only problem is they don't really mention unobtainium, and I was hoping Selfridge was going to at least mention that once, but the resources plot has become very messy and convoluted because it's not really about the resources anymore. It was more about obviously the personal revenge story about Quaritch and Jake. But one of the main backbones of the Avatar story is this corporate resources plot. And Scoresby's got this plan during the mass migration of the whales where they have this meeting point and they're going to push them into this cove and slaughter them and kill a whole year's worth of whales in one day and make $800 billion or whatever the figure happened to be. The space whaling story is still there, but the mining story has been dropped. And it would have been a perfect chance to blend both of them together because Selfridge is back and he's obviously there for a reason. He's not just there for a cameo. It's also the point where Dr. Garvin makes a moral choice. He's been a moral fence sitter. He says you can't just kill all those whales. All the clans rely on them, their family. You can't just slaughter them all. Where Scoresby replies, it's $800 billion worth of resources and a whole year's worth of whaling, and we can get very rich doing it. So one side's just about the profit. They don't care about killing innocent extraterrestrial creatures. They just care about the money. So in the meantime, Spider is breaking out of his cell. He's disguising himself as a worker. He's heading out into the courtyard in order to save Jake. Dr. Garvin makes a moral choice. He steals a bulldozer, also to free Jake. And Neytiri's also on her way to free Jake. So Jake should feel like he's very popular because he's got 3 separate individuals coming to his rescue. So what follows is a massive action set piece. Neytiri lands in the base, makes her way past a couple of dim-witted human guards and Mangwon warriors, and heads for Varong's tent in order to take a hostage. Spider's making his way to the box at the same time. Dr. Garvin drives through the wall with a giant bulldozer from the first film, which causes chaos. People scatter. The amp suits, which I really love. I think they're probably one of the coolest things in the film. Start shooting at him. He heads for the box. He breaks the box open, releasing Jake. He covers Jake's retreat while he backs the bulldozer back into the hole he has just made. Spider follows him. They send a gunship up to stop them, but Selfridge orders them to not fire on Spider, and Spider knows this. Spider protects Jake and gets him to cover. And this is where this power battle between Selfridge and the General start to play out. The General overrules it, says, I'm not playing this game, kill them both. Selfridge says no. Neytiri blows up the gunship and saves both of them, and there's gunships and amp suits out sweeping the base in order to find Jake. He's dressed in orange prison fatigues. The Mangwon, Quaritch, and Varong are also looking for Jake and Co. They hitch a ride on Neytiri's Banshee and make their way out of the bowels of the city. So that whole night RDA base sequence is intense. It's well thought out and well planned. It was a little unexpected to have the 3 escape stories all converging on one another, but I think it works. You get this Easter egg of who is the chairman. There's this new power struggle between the humans brewing. Quaritch is also painting himself like a Mangwon warrior, and I think it's pretty apparent at this point in the film where his allegiance lies. He has gone tribal. He has gone over to Varong's side, and he's kind of pushed the RDA aside, which is interesting because it was another very dramatic development in his character and his story. So 45 minutes before this, he was all about the RDA and bringing Jake in, and now he's gone full tribal. And it kind of seems like the obsession to stop Jake is this mission that he hasn't been able to override yet, because yes, he does hate Jake and he blames him for his own human body's death, but at the same time, catching Jake is a bit redundant. He's caught him, he's escaped, he had Spider, he's trying to make this connection with his son, and his son has just turned his back on him again. The RDA has turned their back on him. The general has basically told him to stand down, otherwise he's going to be stripped of his title, lose his command, and be sent home, which means Varong and her warriors would also be cast out of the city. So it's a very dramatic and very entertaining kind of first half of the film. It's probably over halfway by this point. Neytiri, Jake, and Spider head home, but they stop along the way because Jake realizes that Quaritch and the humans will not stop hunting Spider because they're going to want his DNA in order to make a synthetic version of what's inside him that's making him breathe the air. Because Jake brings up a good point. If humans don't need masks and can breathe the air, that means the whole planet's going to be full of humans sooner rather than later. So Jake makes a very tough decision to try to kill Spider. He leads him off into the jungle. Spider begs him to stop, but ultimately accepts why he has to do what he thinks he has to do. He thinks he's going to save his family and the rest of the Navi people, because Spider's ability to breathe the air is now another commodity the RDA want. And so far, Neytiri has wanted to kill him pretty much the entire film. She has a change of heart, runs into the jungle in order to stop Jake. But Jake has already made his decision and has spared his life. It's actually a pretty emotional scene because Cameron has taken the time to build up this family story. Even though he's the adopted human son, he's still part of the Sully family. He's taken the time to build this family narrative, and it pays off in scenes like this because they're much more emotional, because you feel the connection is real. If it was Quaritch, on the other hand, it wouldn't be so believable because he's been so distant and he's always about playing an angle in order to accomplish a mission. So now the whales come back into the story. They've always been there, but there's another subplot involving Pycon and getting kicked out of his tribe and the other tribes of the whales. There's a big meeting. You see the big bulls with the piercings and the ribbons and stuff, and they say they're not going to fight. Jake tells them that in 2 days' time, they're going to be massacred by the RDA and that they have to fight back. There's no other alternative. Even though they are pacifists, they are going to have to fight because it will mean their extinction if they don't. Loak plays a pivotal part, standing up to the council with Pycon. They take some time to think it over, so you don't quite know how they're going to go. Are they going to fight, or are they just going to let themselves be wiped out by the humans? It's at this point too that Jake takes a stand and realizes he's going to have to fight to the death in order to stop the humans from destroying everything that he has come to care about. Jake and Neytiri have 2 days to pretty much raise an army in order to fight back against the RDA. And this is where things get a little repetitive. This is more or less the same as the recruitment scene from the first Avatar. There's some of the same clans. It's just a different perspective. They fly about to different parts of Pandora to recruit as many warriors to the cause as they can, which is very similar to the fight against Quaritch in the gunship in the first Avatar. At this point in the film, Jake is reunited with an old friend from the first film, the legendary Turok, the gigantic red and yellow and blue banshee that the tribal leader rides in the first film. Jake regains his title as leader of the people and finally accepts that he is going to have to take leadership if he wants to fight back against the humans and win. It was really good seeing the Turok back. I did love that character from the first one. And that was a really cool scene. He goes into this cave full of skeletons and you see the eyes and he says, "Hello, old friend." So momentum is building. The clans are gathering towards Jake again. And there's a little hope that he might be able to pull this ambitious plan off. There's 2 days to the whale hunt. The clock is ticking. Jake and the others don't have much time to organise a resistance. And this is where I have a little bit more criticism of the film, because really up until now, the corporate whale hunting, whale oil plot has pretty much been on the sideline, and now it's back as one of the big driving forces to the next upcoming action scene. It's a little annoying because while on one hand I did know it was coming because it's one of the big action scenes they've teased in the trailers, but what I saw in the trailers, it did look very reminiscent of what the the whaling scenes from The Way of Water and the big battle from the end of that film. And there's a lot of stuff that is carried over from Way of Water into this. There's some nearly identical scenes of the crab subs doing the, punching the hands and then going into the water, the subs launching from in the big hovercraft thing, the pilots getting attacked and sunk underwater. Some of the scenes I nearly thought were pretty much the same from The Way of Water. Going back and watching The Way of Water before I saw Fire and Ash, that doesn't seem to be the case, but it is very similar. It's the same whale hunt. There's a underwater battle and the above water battle, because there's some very identical scenes from the first whaling scene, like where Scoresby and the boats are launched and they start hurting the whales with the sonic cannons. The big tattooed guy next to Scoresby is also in it. I don't know how he survived the boat crash either, because I'm pretty sure he was one of the last people on the boat. So there's all the boats chasing the whales into the cove, and you think, okay, well, this is kind of like the same thing. They're hunting this one whale that's out on it by itself. There is another whaling scene in the film where they harvest the oil that's very similar to The Way of Water, and that kind of drives Dr. Garvin to make his choice. So it was a little annoying just seeing kind of that repetition, but at the same time, it does make sense. And obviously this time around, the scale and the stakes are much higher, because I think there's like 4 or 5 of the massive aircraft carriers, along with smaller boats and this gigantic black and red hovercraft thing, the command vessel with the general on it. So the general of the RDA is going on the whale hunt as the Dragon gunships, and they got air cover this time because they know that this is where they're most likely going to be attacked and some type of resistance is going to be employed, because there are so many whales in the one place, and humans are greedy and they want to get all the resources that they can. So the RDA is putting everything security-wise to protect the boats in order to collect their profits. So the battle draws very close. Jake is luring the humans into a trap. The whales are all basically by themselves, appearing defenseless. And Scoresby's pretty confident that they're going to have a massive hunt. There's a big bull that's causing some trouble and hitting some of the ships. The general says to Scoresby, "Aren't they usually placid?" Scoresby replies with something along the lines of, "They're usually pretty timid, like they're not aggressive at all," which is a clear sign that this is not going to be the standard run-of-the-mill whale hunt that Scoresby thinks it's going to be. And Jake, Neytiri, and the Banshees are all up in the rocks, much the same as from the first film, when they're hiding up in the Hallelujah Mountains, waiting for Quaritch. Similar thing, you see the ships come into focus along with the gunships, and then Jake launches his attack. And what follows is a pretty epic and colourful battle. The gunships are getting targeted by the Banshees and the Turok. There's a lot of destruction. The whales fight back and start to sink some of the big RDA ships. I did enjoy the battle. It is very long, like the battle from the end of The Way of Water. It's probably well over an hour long, and it takes up pretty much the whole third part of the film. The battle goes Jake's way pretty early on. That is until Varong, Quaritch, and her Mangwon raiders appear to even the score. They've all got guns. Most of the Na'vi don't. There's also a solar eclipse inbound, and the battle gets flipped on its head. The battle is pretty epic in scale. So is the whale hunt this time. It was epic in the first one, but this is just taking that similar concept and just pumping it full of steroids. The battle is truly epic. Once Quaritch and Varong arrive, things start to go south pretty badly. Jake and his forces get slaughtered. Jake is injured. Neytiri comes off a Banshee, I'm pretty sure. Jake's Turok crashes into a rock. He's injured. He gets shot with an arrow through the leg. His son helps him out onto the rocks. It's also pretty clear that Quaritch has disobeyed direct orders from the general and has gone full native, even though he is acting in the best interests of the general. by coming to her aid. The only difference is he's coming to the rescue with the clan that the general didn't really want to recognize, and he is disobeying orders in order to save the general that was going to demote him if he disobeyed orders. So there's a weird paradox in Quatch's decision. So the battle intensifies. Night has fallen. Jake's forces are getting their asses kicked. Kiri feels like she has to do something, so she decides to commune with Awa and jump in the water, and risking her own life by attaching herself to the underwater spiritual tree like she did in the first one. And Kiri I haven't really touched much upon, but she is a very central point of this film, and her character too is mysterious. They explain a bit more of the backstory of how she was conceived. It's still a little mysterious. She's like the miraculous conception of Awa and a human. I'm pretty sure she's the embodiment of Awa that was planted in Sigourney Weaver's character from the first one, Dr. Grace. I can't remember her last name. She was Awa's favourite human because she understood the ecosystem and she respected it. So I think she kind of, Awa plants the seed in her, and then Kiri is like the physical manifestation of this go-between between the physical world and the spirit world. The spirit world is delved into a lot more in Fire and Ash than the previous two films. It gets a lot more spiritual than it already has. The mystery about Kiri too keeps deepening. You also get to see the face of Awa. That whole spiritual side of Avatar has also been expanded, which is why the brother at the start of the film was tapping into these memories of his brother, or not so much memories, but he gets to visit the consciousness of his brother via Awa when he connects to the tree underwater, which I thought was a really cool concept and one you don't see a lot of in science fiction. Spirituality usually gets pushed aside in science fiction films in favor of technology, with the exception of Avatar, Dune, and Star Wars. But before the battle is done, Awa might have one more trick up her sleeve. There's a gigantic, they call it a magnetic devil, which is like this gigantic magnetic gravity well kind of thing that's in the ocean, near the shore, near the rocks, that also has all these floating rocks around it, and this like vortex that sucks anything metal into it and plays havoc with the electronics on the ships, much like the mountains did in the first film, which is why the humans get their ass kicked, because they can't use targeting to target any of the riders. And that's sucking the gigantic RDA ship into it. The whales have destroyed a couple of the other hovercraft, but it's not enough, so Kiri taps into the Awa matrix in order to beg Awa for help. Awa responds with a whole army of space squids and sea creatures. They attack the underwater subs, attack the people in the boats, and even up the battle again. The whales attack, sink some of the big RDA hovercrafts and ships. Banshees fill the sky. They start picking off the Mangwon raiders. They target the RDA airships and cause chaos. Pycon finally takes his revenge on Scoresby. He's the last one left on this ship. The cable gets wrapped around the ship. It gets pulled down. Scoresby ends up in his mouth, and he takes him down to the depths of the water, much the same way Captain Ahab meets his demise in Moby Dick, which is how I thought Scoresby met his demise in The Way of Water. So Mother Nature fights back. The RDA get obliterated. Most of their maritime and aerial resources are wiped out in the battle. The general is sucked into the gravity well. Neytiri washes up on a rocky shore along with Ronal. Kate Winslet's character is heavily pregnant. She gives birth before passing away. Now Neytiri is left to care for a child, defend herself, and fight off Varong and Quaritch that have just landed on the rocks and taken her prisoner. They take her back to one of the RDA ships that hasn't sunk in order to draw out Jake. Jake's injured, but Loak is helping him to get to the water. Jake goes to save Neytiri. She's taken hostage on one of the RDA hovercrafts. And there's a big boat fight, which is very similar to The Way of Water. It's actually nearly too similar in some regards, except it's got Varong instead of just Quaritch's recumbent Marines. It's a bit more repetition. I would have liked a little more originality in this part of the film. Yeah, it makes sense that it's taking place on a boat, but at the same time, it could have happened in a different location, or it could have played out a little differently. It's a little too similar because it's at night. It's on the sinking hovercraft again. But just when you think things are getting a little too repetitive, Cameron takes it up a notch. This time around, Loak takes out the bad guys because Neytiri's still being held hostage. I can't quite remember exactly the order of events that plays out because it's been a couple of weeks since I've seen it. But Loak redeems his family. Jake saves Neytiri. Varong realizes that she's going to get her ass kicked, and she escapes into the night, leaving Quaritch to face Jake. Neytiri and the others get off the ship except for Spider, Jake, Quaritch, and Loak. They are sucked up into the gravity well, and a big fight between Jake and Quaritch ensues. It's a pretty cool fight. It's literally gravity defying. These two fight each other at a similar time in The Way of Water. The only difference this time is it's on this floating gravity devil thing. But the stakes are higher, especially the emotional ones, because Spider is there. Quaritch is trying to get him to come over to his side. It's kind of like there's little bits of Empire Strikes Back scattered throughout this scene. Quaritch is Vader. He's trying to get Luke, Spider, over to his side. He's got every right to go too, because Quaritch has been the one that has been nicer to him. Jake did try to murder him about an hour ago. Neytiri hasn't been particularly nice to him the entire film. So you can't blame Spider if he was to jump ship and join Quaritch. And that's kind of how I thought things were going to go. But Jake just sticks true to himself. He fights Quaritch. The ship is sucked into the gravity well. It's destroyed. A lot of explosions and fire get sucked up into the gravity well. The fight continues. Spider makes his choice. Jake and Quaritch continue the fight. Jake gets the upper hand. Quaritch goes over the cliff. But Jake makes a choice to try to save him. There's a bit of Last Crusade in here. But Quaritch won't allow himself to be saved by his enemy and decides to plummet into the depths of the gravity well. But having said that, I don't think this is the last time we've seen Quaritch, and I'd be very, very, very surprised if Quaritch doesn't make an appearance in Avatar 4. He will definitely be back. So Spider chose Jake, despite all the conflict and friction over the course of the film. The Sullys have been healed emotionally, not so much physically, because they're all pretty much injured, which concludes the film. There isn't the eye-opening scene right before the credits like the previous two films. I was kind of hoping that was going to happen, but it didn't. So the film draws to a close and ends on a somber note. It's still positive, but it's just more of a somber tone, because the ending of The Way of Water was quite emotional. The ending of Avatar was more uplifting, and this is this kind of balance between the two. It's a bit more somber because of what has come before it in The Way of Water and the journey so far, and the characters that have been lost along the way. But at the same time, the bad guys have been defeated and the good guys have won the day. For now, at least, anyway. I was kind of thinking Cameron might go Empire Strikes Back and make the bad guys win, with the RDA like kick the shit out of Jake and the Na'vi, and they have to come back in the fourth film in order to set things right and save their home. That would be probably my biggest criticisms. But the film ends on a more somber yet uplifting note. If this was the last Avatar film to be made, it would have been satisfying, and it would have been a great way to round out the trilogy. It's a fascinating and colourful world James Cameron has created, and I definitely want more Avatar films, despite what people say about them, because I am a sucker for Avatar. So all in all, I really loved Avatar Fire and Ash. I'd give it 5 out of 5 stars. It's by far probably one of the biggest and best films I've seen all year. And obviously I'm a little biased because I do love James Cameron and Avatar. But I did really enjoy the film. I think the first one is probably a more solid film on the whole. The Way of Water is great as well. This one was a little more uneven than the first two. There was a lot of themes and a lot of the action was a little repetitive from The Way of Water. I did like the connections back to the original Avatar, but there was a little bit too much repetition. I think Cameron probably could have afforded to be a bit more risky and not rely on so much of The Way of Water. There could have been a little more original in some parts, but overall I did really like the direction of the film and how it has expanded the world of Pandora, the spirit world. It's brought new clans and characters into it. But at the same time, if this was the last Avatar film to be made, it also rounds out the trilogy nicely. It doesn't leave it on too much of a sad note or too much of a happy note. There's a nice blend of being somber but uplifting at the same time. So if this one wasn't to do well at the box office, it would be a nice way to round out the trilogy as a whole. But at the same time, it also can lead into a much bigger world going forward in 4 and 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however many films there happens to be. I love the world that James Cameron has created, and I really hope there's more Avatar films in the future. So what will come next? That is the big question. And Avatar Fire and Ash definitely has some very key themes in it too. The biggest theme of the film is loss and family, having to fight and being willing to die for what you love in order to protect it. Now, as I mentioned, there is a little bit of repetition in this film. There are some very repetitive action scenes, but there is a bit of repetition with the themes as well, which is not surprising because it is such a close carryover from Way of Water. It literally starts where Way of Water ended, so that's not overly surprising. So what did I like about the film? I love the pacing. It didn't feel like a 3-hour and 20-minute film. It was quickly edited. It was very well paced. It just kept going to the next thing. It doesn't get weighed down or bogged down in any subplot or drawn out dialogue scene. It's rapid fire editing and action. The visual effects were outstanding. It's by far obviously the most special effects heavy film ever made. The motion capture is taken to the next level. I mean, Avatar films have pioneered and taken to the next level motion capture. Look at the difference between number 1 and number 2. This isn't the same 15-year period or 12-year period from 1 to 2, but you can tell there's been an improvement in the motion capture. There's some scenes I'd actually say there's a majority of the scenes where there's a human character and a fully digital character in it. I wouldn't say 100%, but pretty much nearly indistinguishable from the human character now. Like the visual effects and the motion capture are so defined now. When Quaritch is talking to the general, you don't see, well, that's a visual effects character and that's a human. Like some of the scenes in The Way of Water, there were some scenes where the digital characters, you could kind of say, well, yeah, that doesn't look like it's the same tone and grain as a human character. This time around, the digital characters are so well defined and crafted. They look nearly identical to a human character. You don't get that. Especially the first one was more noticeable. You obviously knew it was an avatar in the scene with a human. This time around, yeah, it feels and looks a lot more realistic. Background environments too seem a lot realer this time around. There were some scenes like in The Way of Water where you think you would swear you were in a real jungle with real moss and rain and various plants. There's not as much background bugs and insects this time around, but the jungle definitely feels real, especially the water. In the first one, I think the backgrounds and the jungles were a bit more obvious that they were all digitalized. They seemed a little more alien, where this time around the jungle seemed a lot more natural, like a jungle you'd find on Earth, because it looks so realistic. And I think because most people think of the Avatar films as this visual spectacle, I think the performance side of things can get lost. And in Avatar Fire and Ash, the performances are absolutely outstanding. Zoe Saldana is fantastic. You can just feel every emotion she goes through in this film. When she's saying how much she hates the pink skins and she wants to kill them, you feel that fucking anger coming from her, even though you're not looking at a human being performing. It's a human being that's been transformed into an alien via the magic of motion capture and visual effects. It's still a brilliant performance. As is Sam Worthington, he is such an underrated actor. I think this is by far his best performance I've seen from him in any film. You really get the desperate father trying to protect his family and his tribe, and the lengths he's willing to go to do it. The range of emotions and the development and the character arc that all these characters go through in this film is far more defined than the previous two films. Stephen Lang, once again, brilliant performance. The obsessive colonel that's going native, and I think next time we see him, if we do, he's going to be a transformed character, and that's going to go to another level again. And I just can't wait to see how he portrays the character in the next film and where Quaritch's journey goes next. Is he going to see the light and side with Jake, or is he going to double down with the RDA? Or does he go fully native and end up living with Varong and doing what Jake and Neytiri have done, start a family? Will his family go to war with Jake's family in the future? Who knows? But Worthington's performance it's the best of his career, I think. Because it's true what they say, motion capture is the purest form of acting. Because just you can feel everything that Jake is going through. The father aspect of Jake Sully is 100% believable, as it was in The Way of Water. You feel the loss and grief and the blame that Jake has in this film. And I think that is the real genius of Avatar, is having that human story portrayed through a digital alien body. And that is the real genius of James Cameron's writing. He can tell these human stories even though it's not really a human family, it's an alien family. It's still relatable. How he centers his characters in these epic stories is a real masterclass on how characters should be written. He can take these gigantic themes, this story of an extraterrestrial invasion by humans who have come to this planet to strip mine it for its resources and wipe out the native population, the story of colonialism, these native alien tribes trying to survive. Everything is gigantic, the scale and scope is massive, but it all comes down to this realistic human story. It's pretty much a science fiction family drama that plays out in this massive epic story. And the way Cameron can take those epic things but ground those characters in reality, in that family structure, I think is his real storytelling genius. Is he can make those characters real, you can feel their emotions, they're relatable, and that is the core of the story, is this human story, the story we can all relate to. He's done the same thing in Terminator, in Aliens, in Titanic. You take that gigantic story of the ship, you have the romance and the drama in it, but at its core, it's a story of star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet, on a doomed ship. But it's those two people's story and experiences that the audience views this much bigger, epic story play out. And he's done the same thing here. In Aliens, it was this mother figure trying to save a innocent girl in the midst of this chaotic corporate espionage, extraterrestrial showdown on a faraway planet. Terminator, a mother trying to save her son from a futuristic killing machine. If she fails, the human race fails with it. And that's what I really love about the story of the Sullys. It's that same family story playing out on a epic scale. But on the other hand, I will say that Fire and Ash wasn't as colourful as the previous films. I didn't get as much bioluminescence as 1 and 2. It was definitely a more subdued, muted color scheme they were going for this time around with the Fire Clan. My other criticisms of the film is I don't think Varong and the Mangwon were really all that well used. The backstory I thought could have been a lot more detailed, and there isn't as much fire and ash in it as the title would suggest. It's definitely there. I just don't think it was developed and used enough. Like I said, the second half of the film, Varong is pretty much just a henchman. Quach is the main bad guy, and she's become this kind of an attack dog for him. So some parts in that regard were a little inconsistent. And as I touched upon earlier, some of the formatting is very similar to The Way of Water. Some of the story structure is nearly identical in parts, as well as some of the action scenes. But other parts are very original, like the RDA base and the escape. The character development and dynamics were outstanding. That story arc with Jake and Spider, is he going to kill him? Is he going to spare him? Quaritch's very weird father-son relationship. The conflict between the General and Selfridge, and those little Easter eggs like who is the chairman, and Garvin finally making that moral choice, were all really cool, well thought out aspects of the film. So that concludes the review side of the show. So let's move on and have a look at the real costs of Avatar, the budget and the marketing, how much did it cost Disney and Fox, global box offices, how it compares to Marvel and Star Wars, and what are the risks for any future Avatar sequels. What is the real cost of Avatar regarding the budget and the marketing? So let's start with the hard numbers. How much did Avatar Fire and Ash cost to make? The production budget for Avatar Fire and Ash has an estimated production budget of around $350 to $400 million. That is a lot of fucking money to make a film. But in contrast with The Way of Water, that's about on par. I think Way of Water was around the 350 to 400 mark as well. But bearing in mind that is the direct filmmaking costs. Actors, sets, visual effects, the technology, cameras, and all the elements you need to actually make the movie. If we factor in the marketing costs, such as global advertisement campaigns, etc., you can add another $150 million on top of that figure. So this is where Hollywood budgets really do explode beyond what a lot of people realize. Big tentpole films traditionally spend about 30 to 50% or more of their production budget on print and advertising, or P&A. In Avatar Fire and Ash's case, that figure is likely around the $150 million mark or even more. But that cost includes global premieres in major cities, which, if you've been following Avatar on social media, they had international premieres in every major city around the world. They did the same thing for The Way of Water. I think it was like a 21-day global premiere tour or something like that. And along with that came massive outdoor campaigns with the giant Avatar logo with the water and the fire around it. They had some props and scenery, as well as big models from the film, like the Banshees and stuff like that. There was the red carpet stuff and just all the logistics of setting up these big, colourful premiere events. Then you have TV spots, international and domestic promos, such as trailers, TV ads, bus promotions, billboards, things like that. Although I will say, I think Fire and Ash could have probably spent more on marketing, because I don't remember seeing a trailer for Fire and Ash until early November this year. Now compare that with The Way of Water. I think the first teaser trailer came out during the Super Bowl, and then they had another trailer a few months after that, and trailers and consistent hype and build-up, and they released a whole new line of toys, the World of Pandora, where they re-released Avatar toys, as well as the figures and characters from The Way of Water, as well as a video game that was announced that came about a year later. This time around, I don't remember seeing any of that. I know there have been some toys released, which I have looked at. I did buy 2 books the other day, but that was after the film came out. This time around, I don't think they spent as much on TV spots. I have seen TV ads, and I have seen, I think I saw a bus or something with some advertisement on it, but nowhere near the amount The Way of Water had. I remember seeing stuff at the football for The Way of Water, and I don't remember seeing the first trailer for Avatar Fire and Ash until I think maybe June or July. Other costs involve event tie-ins, digital and experimental marketing like social media, YouTube, things like that. So trade reports specifically peg Fire and Ash's marketing at around $150 million, meaning the total studio outlay for Avatar Fire and Ash production plus the marketing budget would be around the $500 million mark, which is astronomical when you think about it. That's $500 million spent on a single film. So to dive a little deeper into the costing of Avatar Fire and Ash, I found an article on hypebeast.com titled Avatar Fire and Ash ignites 345 million US global debut with 88 million USD from North American theaters. It's just a very quick summary article. Avatar Fire and Ash opened to $345 million globally, with $257 million coming from overseas territories and $88 million from the US. The film marks the second biggest opening of 2025 behind Zootopia 2. That is surprising. But marks roughly a 20% decline in debut energy compared to 2022's The Way of Water. And I'd probably attribute that to cost of living. Avatar Fire and Ash 2 is not really the cheapest film to go see because you don't want to go see it in just 2D. You want to go see it 3D. Or if you have the option, you want to go see it in IMAX or 4D IMAX. The problem is now there's so many options to see a film, and you could spend $30 to $50 if you want all the premium options. I mean, I saw it at my local theatre and I'm a member there, so I get discounted tickets. I think I pay about $16 for a ticket. If you're not a member, you'd pay, I think, $22 for an adult or $24. I think it's $22. Plus the 3D surcharge on top of that. So my tickets are usually $16. However, because I'm a tight ass, I go on Cheap Tuesdays where they have the member movie of the week. The week I saw it was a Tuesday, so I went to see it on Cheap Tuesday. So my $16 ticket turns into a $13 member ticket because I'm cheap. So why would I see a movie for $22 when I can see it for $16? And why would I see it for $16 when I can see it for $13? So the 3D surcharge took the total to $18. So if you paid $22, $24, you add the surcharge on top of that. So that's a pretty expensive day out. And I remember when I brought 2 adult and a child ticket to see Way of Water, I think it was like $58, and then I realized, oh yeah, I've got a card, I can get this cheaper. That was before I was a member. So then I refunded the tickets and then got them slightly cheaper for about $48 or something like that. So it's a fucking costly day out, and with the cost of everything being so expensive, food, water, utilities, the cost of living is out of fucking control. I don't blame people for not going to see a film this expensive, or even just seeing it in 2D. So 20% decline, considering where the world is at the end of 2025, is probably not that shocking, to be honest. I'm actually surprised it's not higher, and it does show that even though times are tough, people want to see these movies. They want to go to the theatre and escapes, and there's no better way to escape for 3 hours and 20 minutes than going and seeing an Avatar film, because you're literally transported to a new world. With a combined $500 million production cost and marketing, the threequel faces a high bar to justify its investment, relying on its historical ability to dominate the box office long after its premiere week. I think it will easily get there. At the time of recording, this is the 3rd of January. I'd say by the end of January, it'll probably be one of the highest grossing films of all time. It'll probably be third or fourth highest grossing film of all time after the first two. It'll easily get over $1 billion, easily. And after doing this review, I have been tempted to go see it again. I did really enjoy it. But the problem is, cost of living and everything else, and that is the big turnoff. Where, you can just wait a couple of months and it'll be on Disney Plus. It's not the same thing. Obviously, you want to see Avatar film on the big screen. James Cameron has once again asserted his dominance over the silver screen as Fire and Ash soared to a massive $345 million worldwide opening, while the figure represents a downturn from $435 during The Way of Water in 2022. The threequel still secured the second largest global launch of 2025, trailing Disney's animated behemoth Zootopia 2. So Disney has the two highest grossing films of the year. Interesting. And that's why they buy up every available IP they can, because it's the only way they're really making any real money. The financial breakdown reveals a heavy reliance on international markets, which contributed to $257 million in total, which we'll get to in a bit more detail a little later. Compared to an $88 million box office figure, that is quite a difference in revenue. These numbers come amid heightened scrutiny as the film carries a staggering $35 million production budget, $150 million promotional price tag. Well, I'd say you could probably justify the promotional side of things because it does seem to have worked. Because a lot of times this year, I haven't even heard of half the films coming out because there's no marketing, there's no trailers. There's only trailers for big films now. You don't see a lot of other trailers. I don't know, on TV it's always the same movies that are getting shown. And in my local theatre doesn't always have the best times, doesn't always play these movies sometimes. And that's the problem. We're living in this time where cinema faces massive challenges from streaming services, where it's cheaper to stay at home and pay for a streaming service once a month and watch a bunch of films that really aren't that good. I wouldn't really call half the films on Netflix real films. But a lot of people, especially lazier people that don't really care about cinema, are more inclined to stay at home and use a subscription service than go to the cinema and make the effort to get in the car, put on a pair of shoes, go to the box office and pay for it, and sit through a film. And that's the problem, is people are so distracted. They have short attention spans. A 3-hour movie is a massive ordeal. I know that was a big consideration for me. I mean, as much as I love the Avatar films, 3 hours and 20 minutes is a fucking long time. I mean, I saw it at 11 o'clock in the morning and I finished at like 2:25. It's a big time commitment. And if you have a short attention span, you're not going to get through this film. There was a younger kid in the same row as me, and he was getting very fidgety at about the 2.5 hour mark. So if you have younger kids too, they don't always make it through those long films. I'm surprised that the studio, I know Cameron has a lot of pull with the studio, but I'm surprised that they didn't try to make him shorter so they can get more sessions in during the day and make even more money. He's one of the few directors that can have the pushback because he has such a good track record with making big epic films and making them successful and making the highest grossing films of all time. Well, I think if this one goes over the $1 billion mark, you'll have 4 over $1 billion movies, which is, I mean, that's good numbers for any film company. And they're figures you can't argue with. There's figures you can take to the studio and go, well, I'll make the movie 4 hours and people are still going to go see it. And based on his previous returns, you can't really argue with that. Going back to what I was saying about streaming versus cinema, cinema has to really work hard now. I mean, that's the problem. Is you look at most of the movies that come out during a year are superhero films or these big budget spectacle films. A lot of smaller independent films go either under the radar, or people like me that have to make a tough choice. Do I want to see the new Avengers movie, or do I want to see a more independent film that has an actor in it that I like, but there's only 3 sessions a day as opposed to 10? What is the more safe bet? The same thing I've seen 20 times before, but I know it is going to be at least 3 stars, is going to be good, or something that might be brilliant, or it might completely suck. That will probably be out on Netflix in like 3 weeks anyway. To reach profitability and maintain the franchise's multi-billion dollar pedigree, the film must display the same legendary endurance as its predecessors. Historically, Avatar installments aren't defined by explosive opening weekends, but by the unprecedented legs throughout the holiday season. Both previous trips to Pandora eventually eclipsed $2 billion, despite starting at a similar pace. Yeah, interesting. So these movies aren't like the biggest weekend earners of all time, and I know that's a huge figure with that movie companies try to justify something, that if it does well on the first weekend, there's that drop off over the next 2 or 3 weeks. And if you get past week 3 and you're still making money, that's pretty good, because I think most films are about dead by 3 weeks, which is interesting. So if Avatar isn't like the highest grossing weekend film, but in the long term, over like a month or 6 weeks, it's still packing out cinemas and making millions of dollars, that really says something, compared to like, I don't know, a Marvel film that might open with like $100 million in the first weekend, but then drop off to like 30, 20, 15 million. But at the same time, would it be as successful if it didn't have the 3D or the IMAX stuff attached to it? Because with inflation, ticket prices, Titanic is still, I think, the highest grossing film of all time, because I think tickets were like $12 back then, and that movie was in the cinema for like a fucking good year. After it won the Academy Awards, it was re-released at least 3 or 4 times in about a 2-year period. And that was before DVDs. That was VHS, and then that was re-released on DVD, Blu-ray. So that is another massive factor as well. Avatar was released with 3D. There was a surcharge for 3D. Fast forward nearly 15, 16, 17 years or so, and that surcharge is still there. The only difference is you have inflation as well, and ticket prices have gone up. It's not like Avatar is a standard ticket price if you are going to see the 3D. You are paying a surcharge, and if you want the more premium experiences like IMAX and 4DX and all that shit, you're paying even more. And that's probably where a significant amount of some of that revenue is coming from. And rightfully so. I mean, the films are so big and expensive and long, you kind of want to make it special, because it is a big, colourful, vibrant world. It's not like a standard movie or even a standard sci-fi film. So if you want to take the family out to go to the movies, you're going to save up and you're going to spend that $100 so everyone can have this experience and go to the far-off world of Pandora. I know I was nearly going to start a Avatar fund to save up, because it cost so much the first time around. This time around, I just went by myself. I wasn't going to go spend $50 on movie tickets 2 days before Christmas. As audiences return to the world of the Na'vi, the keys to success lie in high margin premium formats like IMAX and 3D, which accounted for a significant portion of early ticket sales. Interesting. While the initial dip in North American attendance is being closely watched, Disney remains optimistic that the lack of major competition in the coming weeks will allow Fire and Ash to colonize the box office well into the new year. Interesting point. And I think that's true. There isn't really a hell of a lot coming out in January. There's always those Oscar bait films that come out around mid-January. But this year, I haven't really seen any. I haven't really seen a lot of trailers for much of anything coming out until really the mid-year. I don't know of any films in the next couple of weeks that would one, knock it off, which I don't think really many films could, and two, that I probably couldn't wait till streaming. There's that Hugh Jackman, Neil Diamond impersonated movie that I want to go see, but that's really about the only thing I can think of, to be honest. So those figures are absolutely eye-watering. $500 million is a lot of fucking money. And I know modern day blockbusters are expensive, and I guess you can make the argument and say $300 million for a really big film is not that expensive for a blockbuster anymore. But after you've added in marketing and promotion, that is definitely one of the most expensive films ever made. And remember, that doesn't include residuals, talent bonuses, distribution fees, which all eat further into the studio's share of the profits. So this brings up the question, who paid what, 20th Century Fox or Disney? Who put up more of the production costs, 20th Century Studios or Disney, or was it a split? Since Disney brought 20th Century Fox in 2019, the Avatar films are now fully under the Disney corporate umbrella. So let's have a deeper look at 20th Century Studios' role in Avatar's production. Historically, the Avatar films have been a 20th Century Studios project. I prefer 20th Century Fox, and that's how I'll always view it. I'm not sure why they changed the name, but it's probably some corporate lame reason. But now it's a Disney internal project. 20th Century Studios is effectively a subsidiary label, so production risks and profits flow back up the chain to Disney. So putting that simply, 20th Century Studios, quote unquote, puts up the film in that it produces and carries the budget. Disney, as the corporate parent, funds the actual money and greenlights the marketing process. So Fire and Ash is best thought of as a Disney film made under the 20th Century Studios brand. Disney then keeps the lion's share of box office after the theaters take their cut, generally about 50% domestically and less overseas, but that varies from region to region. It then negotiates streaming, Disney Plus, Netflix, that type of thing, pay TV, merchandise, and theme park revenues on top of that. The way the film studios run are just basically just banks, pretty much. They're money-making monsters. They take an IP like Star Wars, Marvel, Avatar, which is obviously the art side of it. They know it's popular, people are going to pay to see it, but you really break it down and how much money they spend on these films and how much is made. Disney might keep the lion's share of the box office. 20th Century Fox sounds like it gets, like the 40% or whatever's left over. It obviously makes its money back. Otherwise, they wouldn't be making more of them. And like I just mentioned, they are a subsidiary of Disney now. So what's good for 20th Century is good for Disney. And obviously, Disney takes the lion's share, but within their lion's share of the profits, they have to pay a cut to theatre owners domestically and internationally, as well as TV, merchandise, streaming, and theme parks that I guess Disney owns because they have the World of Pandora at Disneyland. So that I guess also makes revenue for the Avatar IP, but also for Disney. It's fucking complicated. Whatever happens, you're just making a film for the art side of it. Those days are long gone. So how much revenue has Avatar Fire and Ash made so far? Fire and Ash's early performance, global gross, the current theatrical run, which would end in 2025, 2026. And obviously the film is still in theaters, so these aren't final figures. By the end of its theatrical run, it will have made more than the figures I'm about to read off. But so far, the global gross has been $859.8 million worldwide, which is pretty fucking impressive. That figure is broken down into $217 million just in North America and $542 million internationally. After, what has it been, 2.5, 3 weeks since it came out? It came out 18th of December, so this is going into the 13th week, and that's factoring in Christmas, Boxing Day, and New Year, so people are away. People are on holidays. A lot of people do go to the movies during that time, but there are a lot of people that also go away. But I think most people probably go to the movies or stay at home during this time, which is why they always save the big blockbuster movies for Boxing Day or mid-early December. So that's interesting. So just within the international revenue, they've made the production cost of the film back plus the marketing and $42 million in profit, which is not the worst business case in the world. It's pretty good. I mean, you're making profit, but then you factor in that $217 million of pure profit from just the North American market. So I found a article on variety.com.au titled "Avatar: Fire and Ash crosses $760 million globally after 2 weekends" by Rebecca Rubin. I'll just quickly skim over this article. It might help us break down some of these figures a bit better. Fire and Ash surpassed $760 million globally after 2 weekends over the busy Christmas stretch. James Cameron's sci-fi epic collected $181.2 million from 51 overseas markets and $245.2 million globally, marking a minimal 25% decline from its international opening weekend. Okay, not too bad. So far, Disney and Fox's film has grossed $217 million in North America, $542 million internationally. Outside of the US and Canada, top markets are China with $99.6 million, France $54.4 million, Germany with $43 million, and Korea with $32.1 million. I guess Australia's box office doesn't count. We contribute to what, 4, 5, maybe 8 million. Fire and Ash is already the 6th highest grossing Hollywood release of this year, and it will continue to climb above hits like Demon Slayer, Infinity Castle, which made $714 million, Jurassic World Rebirth, $869 million. I am really surprised that film made that much. I thought it would make $500 million, but not $869 million. I mean, it was better than Dominion, but I mean, a pile of steaming shit is better than Dominion. So that actually really surprises me, and it's no wonder that they've already greenlit a sequel for that film. And a Minecraft movie with 958 million. That one really does surprise me how massive that film was. I guess never underestimate a video game movie and marketed at teenagers and young people. I don't get how that film was so... I don't get Minecraft at all. I really don't. And that chicken jockey scene with people throwing shit in the air, that is just the perfect example of this overhype, sensationalist culture. So many young people now are so overhyped by those stupid social trends. It's like the fucking Super Bowl, how overhyped it is, and when you watch the game, nothing happens or it's a complete blowout. And then you have a fucking $200 million 15-minute halftime show by some washed-up celebrity, and people rave about it. And people are like, oh, dude, did you see that? That's the fucking best halftime show ever. And that's how I see fucking movies like a Minecraft movie. I don't get how that movie was so successful. How did it make nearly $1 billion? I know it appeals to a younger teenage audience. I don't get the games. I didn't see it. I don't really care for it. But when I saw the reactions to that chicken jockey scene, I really had to bang my head against the wall and say, is this really where we are as a human race in 2025, where people are throwing popcorn and drinks in the air and letting off fucking fire extinguishers because Jack Black says they got the chicken jockey? I don't even know what the fuck that is supposed to mean. How people were so oversensed and how overhyped just that part of the film was. I remember seeing in my local theatre notes at the counter and on the posters for Minecraft saying any aggressive, violent behaviour will not be tolerated and the police will be called. I've never ever seen a warning like that on the poster or the counter for any movie ever. It just perfectly summed up 2025. Overhyped, over-sensationalized, load of shit pretty much. And it's the same shit that the media does. They just like hammer these pointless fucking stories about nothing, while real important news always slips through the cracks. And that's getting off topic. Went on a bit of a rant there, so back to the article. Avatar 3 should become 2025's third blockbuster to surpass the $1 billion mark, following two other Disney behemoths, Lilo and Stitch, which made $1.3 billion. Really? That movie made that much money? And Zootopia 2 at $1.3 billion. So Disney has made, $3 billion over 3 movies this year. Interesting. To underscore Disney's box office dominance, none of its rival studios fielded a single $1 billion film since 2023. Interesting. So Disney is still the king when it comes to making money, because they brought up all the IPs, as I mentioned. And obviously that is their only strategy. Their remakes suck, but they still seem to make money, because I guess they appeal to a mass generic market. They own Star Wars, Marvel, and Fox. So they are getting quite a bit of revenue from different fan bases from around the world. I mean, it's a genius business move. As an artistic move, though, it is pretty scummy, because you are cornering the market, and then you have Disney Plus, then you don't want to export DVDs and Blu-rays to the southern hemisphere, because apparently it doesn't make them enough money in revenue, so people like me can never really have a true collection of Star Wars because I can't buy it. I have to buy the region-free stuff overseas for more than I would have paid here. Key question for box office watchers is where Avatar Fire and Ash will end its theatrical run. The third installment has a higher bar to clear in terms of theatrical expectations, because the first two trips to Pandora stand as the two biggest movies in history with $2.9 billion and $2.3 billion respectively. Avatar 3 doesn't necessarily need to hit the $2 billion mark to be considered commercial success, though the mega budgeted film does need to keep playing in theaters to justify a massive price tag for Disney. That shouldn't be a problem, since Avatar films have become synonymous with box office staying power, meaning the visual spectacles are known to stick around in theaters. And yeah, like I said, there's not a hell of a lot else out, so I can't imagine that it will need to have a short run in order to make room for more films. It will probably be in the theaters for quite some time. And obviously Disney will probably try to keep it in theaters as long as possible to make as much revenue, the same way they did the opposite with Snow White, and they pulled it out of theaters because it was costing them too much because it wasn't selling any tickets. So even if Avatar just breaks the $800 to $900 million mark and doesn't surpass $1 billion, which I think it probably easily will, the film is still on track to cover the $500 million combined production and marketing costs. It also pushes into true profit territory once the theatre distribution and owners split the costs. But I think most importantly, it is justification and fuel for Disney to greenlight even more sequels. If they can make $900 million out of this one, and I think there's a fair argument to say cost of living has probably affected the bottom line pretty heavily, and especially the timing too, because it came right before Christmas, so people are like, do I take the family out for a $100 movie, or do I buy Christmas presents this year? Because times are tough, inflation is a real thing, and a lot of people are hurting globally. Even if it doesn't make a dollar more from its $900 million that I think it's currently at, it's still a success, and it's still one of the highest grossing films of this year, even if the first two made more. So there are independent industry forecasts suggesting the movie could top $900 million and eventually push for the $1 to $1.8 billion as the theatrical run continues. And like I said, it's only been out for a couple of weeks. It's still, I think at least an easy month still in the cinemas. So it still has quite a long theatrical run yet. So to get a bit more background into these figures, I found another article on Forbes.com titled Avatar Fire and Ash tops $900 million at worldwide box office by Mark Hughes. I'm just going to skim read this. By Sunday, at the latest, James Cameron's third installment of Avatar will surpass Lilo and Stitch's $1 billion to become the third biggest release of the last year. From there, it'll take an additional $600 million or more to catch up to and surpass Zootopia 2's $1.5 billion. Wow, that movie made a lot of fucking money. I don't even remember the first one. To come into the second spot on the 2025 worldwide box office charts. The momentum and built-in fan base for Avatar will easily carry it over the $1.5 billion threshold, but from there it is still uncertain whether the film will be on its last legs and wind down, or if this is another case of never underestimate James Cameron and the film continues marching towards $1.8 billion and makes a run at $2 billion. Given Cameron's previous films, I would say never underestimate James Cameron. It will probably easily get to the $1.5 billion. I hope it gets to 1.8. Even if I love the film, I'm not quite sure I can justify seeing it 2 or 3 times in the cinema when it is going to cost that extra. I might see it again. I'm not too sure. I'm trying to save money this year, but hopefully it does get there, and I think it will. Like I said, there's not a hell of a lot else out. We need to see the holds next week and the second week of January to get a true picture of whether we're looking at $1.5 to $1 billion range or something higher for Avatar 3, but I want to be very clear here. It's simply absurd and unrealistic for anyone to publicly pretend the film is somehow failing, or that north of $1 billion means they can't make any money, which obviously isn't true because we've seen it's already made profit. It's covered its production and marketing costs and has made about, $250 million in profit and climbing. That's a win for any film. The talk around budgets and needed profits is filled with disingenuous claims and pretense frankly designed more to convince fans to rush out to see the film again or fear they won't get any more sequels than any serious facts about the film's performance and financials. The 3 Avatar films make a combined $6.2 billion so far, with the first 2 chapters grossing in excess of $5 billion. How much do you really honestly think each of these films cost to make and market? I'll give you a hint. It's a lot, but it's not remotely what they tell you it is. The numbers are always manipulated to claim great success while simultaneously claiming to be broke. Yeah, interesting. That's the side of things I never actually considered. Of course, Disney's going to tell you it costs $350 million to make. I mean, it probably did. Well, it wouldn't surprise me, but at the same time, if they lied about those figures, that wouldn't surprise me either. And how much did it actually cost to market? I guess if the numbers are cooked, then no one really will ever know how much it actually cost to how much it made. They filmed the second and third film simultaneously to save money and to maximize efficiency in the visual effects and other posts. It's a good idea. So when you hear those outrageous, staggering sums supposedly spent on each individual film, I want you to remember the phrase Hollywood accounting and how such math is used to claim films like Titanic never made a profit. Yeah, I really doubt that Titanic didn't make a fucking profit. That movie, I think was like under 300 million because they obviously built like most of a real ship and all the detail and all the craftsmanship that actually went into physically making the props and stuff. But that film I'm pretty sure made like its production and marketing budget back by a lot. And I mean, it was a while ago, but I don't remember seeing heaps and heaps of advertisement. I think there was obviously the built-in history buffs that were going to go see that film regardless, and it wouldn't have been in the cinema as long as it was if it didn't make any money. So of course the studio pays less taxes, and people promised back-end profits see none of their expected money as the film sells towards $3 billion, and everyone cheers this success until asked, quote, "What about the profits then?" And suddenly it's back to hat in hand posturing as poor artists struggling to make a buck. All right, that's very interesting. So in other words, they say the movie cost so much and they didn't make any profit, and that way they pay less tax. Maybe someone needs to audit some of these film studios, and they're kind of victims of their own success in a way because they're getting brought out by streaming studios because all the traditional film studios are going broke, leaving Netflix and the other streaming giants to buy them. And I've recently heard that Universal was laying off employees so they could get the last Fast and Furious film made. I think they were supposed to make a third one, and that got cut because they couldn't afford it, or it wasn't worth the risk because the last one didn't do that well, or something like that. So that's interesting. So we're living in a day and age where streaming services are more profitable than the traditional film studios, and are buying the film studios because they are literally going broke. Interesting. It seems like a lot of this quote-unquote Hollywood accounting probably has a lot to do with that. So with that in mind, I'm not going to treat seriously the breathless reporting that Cameron might cancel the next 2 sequels and just post the stories online. Interesting. Because this third film only made 1.5 to 1.8 billion. Because that's not going to happen, and never was. The merchandising and home entertainment sales and other ancillary revenue streams are all also massive for the Avatar franchise. So on top of the hundreds of millions of dollars from box office that's returning to the studio, there's as much or more from merchandise, with profit margins vastly higher. Interesting. That's how George Lucas funded some of the Star Wars sequels, is through the toy sales, because merchandise sells. I was going to get more Avatar merchandise, but I'm not paying $68 for a figure when the ones from The Way of Water were like $35-40. I got some on sale for like $20. So that's a bit fucking ridiculous. The other day I spent $80 on 2 Avatar books, the visual dictionary for Fire and Ash and the making of Avatar 1, 2, and 3. And when I first saw those books, there were quite a few on the shelf, and when I went back, there was 3 visual dictionaries left and 4 of the making of. How does Disney make money from streaming? I guess how many times it gets streamed or something like that. It equates the profit somehow. These studios, it's like the casinos. The house always wins. They're not going to lose that much money unless you're Universal and you go broke and you have to get brought out by Netflix or one of the other streaming giants. They let Jared Leto make a Tron sequel, for goodness sake. Look around at all the franchises and filmmakers still making their next chapters and movies after stumbles and failures. You seriously think anyone's cancelling another Avatar movie because this one only tops 1.5 billion? That's a fucking very good point. 1.5 billion is still 1.5 billion. It's far more than 98% of the movies that were released this year, and that would guarantee any type of real meaningful profit margin guarantees a sequel these days. I think Ridley Scott's talking about the Gladiator 3 sequel because the second one did so well, even though it was critically panned by a lot of people. I mean, I did enjoy it because it's ancient Roman content. I like ancient Rome. You don't get many movies set in ancient Rome, so you got to take your Roman Empire fix when you can. But it made enough to justify another sequel. And that didn't make $1 billion. That made a healthy return, but it was nowhere near Avatar. And even, like I said, it's already made its production and marketing budgets back, plus 250 million profit and climbing. So it's still a win-win for the studios. And look, if Disney only made $250 million, it's still $250 million they make, and it's still justification to make more sequels. Besides, in addition to the fact that Avatar Fire and Ash is a blockbuster, there are a few points to consider in assessing how much it's underperforming. If it even does at the current rate, it's entirely possible it could wind up with the same 2.3 billion final gross as Way of Water. Yeah, that would be bad for it, wouldn't it? I got a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot more Avatar sequels, and people aren't going to get sick of this franchise, no matter how much shit it actually cops. Fire and Ash had a few days less in its build-up to Christmas, understandable, when the film inevitably saw another blockbuster weekend performance, but still overall below expectations. With less time in the global marketplace, there will continue to be some distance between Fire and Ash and The Way of Water. I can't remember if The Way of Water came out 2 weeks before Christmas, or was it the 18th of December as well? I think it was the 15th of December, so it might have been a couple of days difference. But even so, it's a couple of weeks before Christmas. People are doing shopping, people are buying presents, cost of living, all that. I still think it's a pretty healthy return. Fire and Ash is the longest film of the franchise so far, meaning it has less screenings per theatre per day. Interesting, that's also another factor that I didn't think about. And thus, it's longer than Way of Water by a couple of minutes, but I guess it adds up over the day. And thus less total number of tickets possible in the first place. Interesting. So they only have a finite amount of tickets per day because of the running time. I guess so. If you can't have the extra session, you can't sell the tickets there. And there's the fact that Avatar movies see a large portion of the audience willing to wait to see the film until the best possible seats are available, which contributes to the long legs demonstrated by the previous films, as audiences kept turning out in huge numbers week after week. So don't be surprised if we see several more weeks of strongholds and big turnout. Yeah, that's another good point. You don't really want to pay like your $30 for 3D IMAX and then sit a row to the front of the screen and go blind and deaf, do you? Or have to crane your neck up at the screen and get a headache and a sore neck. So yeah, that's interesting. People will wait for a good seat. Once it completes its run, Disney is looking at owning 3 of the 4 top spots this year at the worldwide box office, with Zootopia, yada yada yada, Lilo and Stitch, Nizar 2, never heard of it, Where's the Crown at the 2025 highest grossing release at $2.1 billion. Interesting, I never heard of that film, and it's the highest grossing. Based on Avatar Fire and Ash's opening weekend, even a suppressed quote for this franchise, 5 times final multiplier, puts it at close to 1.9 billion, so anything in the more typical range would send it north of 2 billion and topping the 2025 box office charts. And of course, a technically unprecedented low 4 times multiplier still positions Avatar 3 for $1.5 billion finish. I got no idea what that multiplier is supposed to mean. I'm guessing, I don't know, screens, the tickets cost or something like that. With back-to-back Avengers sequels, Doomsday and Secret Wars, boring. Featuring a return of Robert Downey Jr., lame, and Chris Evans in a 2-part follow-up to the Avengers Endgame, because we really needed one. Marvel hopes to win back the audience interest after 2025, in which 3 MCU releases were bested by former Marvel filmmaker James Gunn's DC Studios hit Superman, and even that didn't do that great from what I've heard. Dynamic directing duo Anthony and Joe Russo could add to their $6.76 billion total box office gross and surpass Cameron, I hope not, with a total north of $11 billion. But that would be sometime after Avengers Secret Wars arrives in Christmas 2027. I saw the trailer for it when I saw Avatar, and there was the Captain America teaser trailer. Steve Rogers, because it doesn't say Captain America apparently. The teaser trailer for that was fucking lame. I've seen a bit of the Thor one, and that was lame. I don't fucking care about Marvel anymore. I don't care about how many Avengers movies they make. I will see it, but I'm not seeing it on the first day. I really couldn't give 2 fucks less. I'm not going to wait in line with a bunch of other fucking rabid Marvel fans. I'll see it 2 or 3 weeks after it comes out. Bringing Robert Downey Jr. back is a stroke of genius, or maybe the worst decision in cinema history. I don't know which yet. And I thought Captain America was dead, so it proves how much I know. And really, what is the story Is it going to be compelling enough? Because the genius of the Avengers is it took the time to build up that story that led to the Avengers. I don't see that as much with this one. I haven't seen some of the Marvel movies that are supposedly leading up to it, nor do I really care to. So the care factor for me personally isn't really there. It just seems like a cash grab. So Avengers Doomsday, yeah, it's going to relate to Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom. Yeah, cool. Is he just another Thanos substitute? I think Doomsday will be probably the highest grossing film of the year. If it's not good, however, I don't think the second part is going to live up to it, because there hasn't been the build-up and the hype over multiple years like the last one. So, yeah, it's a slippery slope. It could do very well. The first one will. I don't know about so much the second one if audiences don't really buy into Robert Downey Jr. returning as the bad guy. Fire and Ash has plenty of open field ahead and more than enough gas left in the tank, and it's not far behind the first film's gross at the same point in time. The only surprise is that Zootopia has a shot at beating it. I expect Avatar 3 to finish close to 1.8 billion and roughly 2.1 being my own highest end estimate. But even 1.5 billion, Cameron will have another enormous hit on his hands. So whatever else winds up true or not about underperforming, you can expect to see those fourth and fifth Avatar films in a few years. Good, I want more of them. And realistically, who gives a fuck about the money at the end of the day? I know it's obviously an important factor in making the film, but enjoy the film. I mean, I don't go into it thinking, oh, this is going to make $1 billion. I just think, am I going to like this film? Is it going to push the story forward? How does it compare to the previous films, and where does the story go next? That's the most important thing at the end of the day. So let's dig a little deeper into how big Avatar really is in terms of franchise totals. So looking back at the entire Avatar saga, going back to the first film, Avatar, in 2009, the production budget, and this is an estimate because no one really knows for sure how much each of these films cost to make. So the estimated budget of Avatar in 2009 was $237 million, and it made a worldwide gross of $2.92 billion. Pretty good investment, I'd say. Very healthy return. The Way of Water in 2022, estimated $350 million production budget, makes $2.34 billion. A little lower in total, but still very healthy. Obviously, I mean, it's $2 billion. 2025's Fire and Ash, $400 million estimated production budget. It has made $860 million and climbing. So it's made its production budget back in, $460 million, which is, what did I say before, 250. So it's made a hell of a lot more than what I thought before. So it's still a hit, and that is enough to justify a sequel. Total franchise gross overall is $6.1 billion and climbing. That makes this one of the most financially successful film franchises in history, and all on the back of sustained international performance. If Fire and Ash eventually breaks the $1 billion worldwide mark, we're talking $6.3 billion plus already for just 3 films. That's 2-point-something billion for each film. Pretty good investment if you ask me. So yeah, like the article mentioned, don't listen to the haters and people saying it fails if it doesn't make $8 billion. And like that said, like the article also mentioned, that's just Hollywood accounting, Hollywood maths. I just hate those statistic people who, when a film like this comes out, all they're talking about is how much it cost and how much it's predicted to make rather than the actual film itself. It's all about, I'll predict it's going to make 1.6 billion. It's going to make 1.8, probably closer to 2 by the end of it. Who cares? It's a different time to 2009 and even 2022. 2025 has been a fucking turbulent, traumatic, and very trying year for everybody. Cost of living, inflation, times are fucking tough. Here's the real world truth that most casual fans don't grasp. When it comes to talking about quote-unquote studio economics, the cost versus the return. The theaters typically take about 50% of a ticket revenue domestically and even more in some international markets. That means that Disney 20th Century Studios might see roughly $400 to $450 million return net from an $860 million gross so far. They're making half or just less than half of what that gross makes. It really makes you wonder, like, if they have a film that flops, that costs $250 million to make, and they only make $350 million back, how much of that money are they actually seeing? Because I know Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny made about 300 and something million, or maybe 400 million. So yeah, not the biggest box office release of all time. And due to them having to reshoot the end of that film, it pushed production costs up even more. And then you factor in marketing. So how much of that did they actually make? Very interesting. And there wasn't a lot of merchandise for that film, or yeah, there was if you went to collectible sites. But I remember when Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls came out, there was a whole line of indie action figures that got a whole new generation interested in Indiana Jones. That wasn't there this time. So how much did Disney actually make off of a film like that is considered a box office flop? It's enough to recoup production plus some marketing, but not yet wide open profit territory. But because the film is expected to continue earning into early 2026, it could potentially hit the $1 billion mark, which means that margin improves fast. And crucially, preceding films already generated billions in pure profit, so the risk for the studio on the third installment is much lower than it would have been for a brand new franchise. Yeah, so that also would explain why studios are more comfortable producing sequel after sequel than investing in new story ideas. It's a smart business move on one hand, but it's also sad on the other that this is where we are in 2025, where you have to rely on regurgitated Marvel sequels to make money because you don't want to take a chance on any new idea because it might not pay off. So you go with a safe bet, which is kind of like what I was saying about not taking chances on more smaller independent films because you just don't know what you're going to get. So the bigger films are the safer bet, especially with the downturn in the economy and cost of living. Do I want to go see the latest superhero movie, or do I want to see something that may or may not suck? So what about Avatar 4 and 5, and hopefully 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10? According to franchise data, Avatar 4 and 5 are already slated for late 2029 and 2031 releases. I really wish I didn't have to wait 4 years for Avatar 4. I was really hoping it was going to be more like 2 years, like Way of Water 2022, 23, 24, 25, since 3 years. I was really hoping the fourth one was going to be a bit sooner, especially since they shot 2 and 3 back to back. So hopefully they're going to shoot 4 and 5 back to back. But I guess it comes down to the amount of time it takes to add special effects and do all that type of stuff. And 2029 to 31. So yeah, there's a fair few years before we get 4 and 5, and will that be the end of the series, or will it be a 6, 7, and 8, and maybe 9 or 10, as Cameron has hinted at? I can't see it quite going to 10, maybe 7. Early production talk suggests a lower estimated budgets, minus $250 million each, for parts 4 and 5 before marketing, a notable drop from the last 3 films. Yeah, I guess, especially for the second one, I can understand why it cost so much, because the technology had changed so much since 2009. And obviously the first film, it was the first of its kind, so there's a lot of experimental costs involved in that, which is why it costs $300+ million. So I can imagine that now they've got the technology sorted, they've got the technology in place, they've got the virtual cameras, they've been tested and refined so they don't have to keep innovating them. That would keep costs lower. You've also got more design elements that are already there, like the backgrounds and the water. They've gone through the testing to make the water look more realistic. I guess it just comes down to actually giving the visual effects crew teams enough time to finish it and actually put some artistry and some care into the special effects and not just sell them out to the highest bidder, which is a massive reason why visual effects today look so shit, is because they get auctioned out to the lowest bidder, and if they can't finish them on time, they have a certain amount of time to finish them. If they can't finish them on time, they have to pay the studio or something like that. It also explains why a lot of those smaller production houses go broke. James Cameron wants to give the effects people enough time to do their job properly, so you have a perfect completed piece of art, or is near perfect as can be, as opposed to a film that looks like the special effects were from 40 years ago. As in the case of the last few Marvel films. I'm really fucking hammering Marvel today. Don't know why, it's just a very convenient example because there's so many Marvel films made. So if the costs of 4 and 5 are around the $250 million mark, that's quite a significant drop compared to Fire and Ash that cost $400 million. So that's nearly half the budget. It's a lot cheaper than the previous films. So if that's true, Disney might have figured out economics for this type of scale on the tech and world building and visual effects side. It also means that future entries into the franchise might be cheaper to make than Fire and Ash and The Way of Water. But all that depends on how well Fire and Ash settles into the marketplace and whether Disney believes there's enough ancillary revenue, such as streaming, theme parks, toys, licensing, to justify another huge amount of money being put into these films. So remember, the purchase of Fox means Disney now treats Avatar the same way it treats Marvel or Star Wars. Big IPs to monetize everywhere possible. And we know the Disney model by now. They pump out sequels and remakes and will not hesitate to remake a film, even if it's 10 years old, just to get a new generation hooked on it, so they can make as much money as possible. It's an interesting business model. It's a smart one, but at the same time it is also killing the art form, because you don't really have an art form if you are just pumping out sequels just to make money and you're not making art for the sake of art. So what is James Cameron's long game? We know Cameron is the master strategist. He's patient, he is methodical, and he's willing to wait years to see his vision come to life. James Cameron doesn't make movies, he engineers cultural events. His work isn't about turning cameras on to actors and hoping for a good weekend that turns out a half-watchable 3-star film that will be forgotten. No, James Cameron is about redefining the language of cinema itself. James Cameron's career shows a very distinct pattern. His first real film, his first independent film, Terminator, redefined action sci-fi. The first Terminator, you could also say, had this hybrid horror element to it. It was a futuristic tech-noir slasher film in a way. Titanic, it's this massive, epic, romantic, emotional drama. How many people thought that film was going to fail? What did people used to say about it? Who's going to pay to see a film you already know the ending to? Well, they got that one wrong because it was one of the highest grossing films of all time, probably still is. Then he has a massive break for a while. He makes documentaries that also push the envelope. Then he comes back with 2009's Avatar. He redefines digital cinema. Avatar was a cinematic revolution. He redesigns the 3D camera, pioneers the virtual camera, and more or less reinvents how digital movies are made. Each leap is technological and narrative. He doesn't just choose trends, he anticipates them. Cameron is well known for being an innovator in the film industry. He doesn't just push the story or make big epic movies for the sake of it. He usually pioneers some type of technological achievement along the way, paving the way for other filmmakers in the future. With Avatar, Fire and Ash, Cameron is playing a long game on multiple levels. He's crafting an interlocking sequel, not just a standalone film, but at the same time, if this was the end of the Avatar series, it would be a good end, but that's obviously not Cameron's long-term game. He wants to create this epic film series that spans multiple films. He spent years on world building before the release of the film. There would have been multiple years of just designing the elements to Pandora, designing the different cultures, the Na'vi, the RDA. He's also one of the few people in Hollywood that is patient and is willing to wait for the technology to catch up with his imagination. He's not just making films to make a quick buck or because he's got nothing better to do. He's staging cultural punctuations that shift the industry baseline. Even in Fire and Ash, the technical decisions are deliberate. Performance capture instead of AI actors. He's made a very strong stance against AI. There's complex environmental simulations, elaborate virtual production. Even some of the ships and the more obvious visual effects elements are very hard to tell that they're actually visual effects. The environments, like I mentioned before, are getting so real, it's scary. All of this is to keep the Avatar experience distinct, but human at its core. Cameron has also publicly banned generative AI usage in his film to protect the actors' performances, emphasizing that real human craft matters in his world building. And I think he's also making a very strong stance that human creativity should remain human. In other words, you could say that James Cameron is the master of the long game approach. He's a man that thinks in decades and not just in quarters. So let's have a close look at the US versus the world box office. The numbers do tell the story here. Avatar Fire and Ash isn't just a movie, it's a global phenomenon, but one with a split personality at the box office. Here's the tally so far. So the US and Canadian and domestic market has made $217 million. The international markets, on the other hand, have made $542 million. Not surprising because there's more people in the international market than the US and Canada. The global total so far is 800 and something million and climbing. Only time will tell at the end of the theatrical run how much it actually makes. So that means that roughly 72% of its revenue comes from the international market, with only about 28% coming from the US and Canada. If you compare that with earlier Avatar films, Avatar in 2009 grossed $785 million just in North America and $2.1 billion internationally, before hitting $2.9 billion worldwide. The Way of Water pulled $688 million domestically, $1.65 internationally, for a total of $2.34 billion. So that is quite a significant downturn. 217 compared to 600. So that tells you something powerful. Avatar travels. It's a global myth, not just a domestic trend. That also brings up a very interesting question. Why don't US audiences seem to be as open to Avatar Fire and Ash compared with The Way of Water and the international market? So several factors shape the domestic reception differently than the international. One of the big factors is cultural filters. In the US, movies are debated through ideological lenses, identity politics, corporate messaging, and generational divides. Some American viewers polarize around whether Avatar's world reflects their tribal identity or not. Then you have political backlash. And that's the problem with the modern world. Everything has become so politicized and woke, you can't even go to the fucking movies anymore without somebody accusing you of something. There's a segment in the US audience that sees Avatar as left-leaning environmentalism with guilt messaging that can feed into broader cultural resistance, even if the movie isn't overtly political. And Fire and Ash isn't overtly political. I don't think any of them are. I don't think it points the finger at any nation, more at human greed as a collective. But that is interesting. So, I mean, is there a portion of the American audience that doesn't feel comfortable seeing a film like that because it's seen as left-leaning environmentalism? The other issue is the familiarity fatigue. American mainstream audiences interact with entertainment on many fronts: TV, gaming, streaming, and the novelty of a 3-hour high-concept spectacle can feel heavy compared to quick hits of superheroes or serialized universe storytelling. By contrast, international markets, particularly in Asia and Europe, tend to embrace connected spectacle with less cultural gatekeeping, which is part of why Avatar remains stronger overseas. I think probably Asian audiences are probably more open to the idea of someone transferring their consciousness into a giant blue body. Asian countries such as Japan and China love sci-fi films, and I think they're a bit more open to the environmentalism. Maybe not China, but in Europe, definitely, I'd say. I'm surprised France has such a big revenue. I thought they would have seen that as over the top, because you don't see too many big budget spectacle films coming out of France. So this brings up the question of environmentalism. So let's have a look at environmentalism in Fire and Ash. The environmental core in Fire and Ash isn't just purely decoration, it is part of the cinematic language. There's the obvious fire versus water, destruction and renewal or rebirth. The volcanic tribes versus the ocean clans is a very obvious metaphor: fire versus water, survival versus adaptation, Pandora is a living world. The ecosystem is a character in itself, as is Awa. And historically, Cameron has spoken out about nature as a protagonist in Avatar, while specific quotes for Fire and Ash aren't widely published yet. His previous commentary on the Avatar franchise and how the planet of Pandora is more than just a pretty scenic backdrop. It's a moral and emotional core to the story. And it is such a huge part of it. You definitely feel it when the forest is burnt or destroyed by the humans. The entire planet feels like one giant character, which is very unique even in terms of science fiction, because a lot of sci-fi films take places on planets, but the planet doesn't really feel like a character, unless it's Tatooine or maybe Arrakis. The narrative impact of the Avatar films is unmistakable. The environment is not just scenery, it's what the characters hold closest. They will die to protect it. They fear losing it, and they're willing to fight for it. What are some of the technological advancements in the visual effects of the Avatar franchise? What has changed over the years? There's a massive jump from 2009's Avatar to 2022's The Way of Water. There were massive advancements in visual effects and motion capture technology, as well as underwater motion capture. That was probably the first time that had been done in a film. A lot of that was filmed underwater, and that would have been really fucking challenging. There was breakthroughs in rendering and 3D technology. But the tech leap between Way of Water and Fire and Ash is more subtle than Way of Water and Avatar. I think this time around, Fire and Ash is more of a refinement and specialization of the technology rather than a massive leap that Way of Water and Avatar were, just because it's only been a couple of years since The Way of Water came out. However, Fire and Ash did have its challenges. Fire and Ash simulations, the volcanoes, the fire, the ash, the smoke, were all elements that would have provided the animators with their own set of challenges. Fire and Ash is also more physics heavy. There's a lot more extreme geography, such as the gravity well, the gravity devil, whatever it's called. There's also the more obvious challenges, such as performance and motion capture with extreme elements like fire. The fire dancing would have been a visual effects element, which would have been very difficult to make it look really real. But having said that, the actors would have had to do a fire dance while wearing motion capture suits, which would have presented its own series of challenges, similar to motion capture underwater. Igniting fire, lit performances, capture with naturalistic environments, lighting and volume capture are other areas that would have been challenging. Even more advanced real-time stage tech to blend actors with the CG environments seamlessly. While there wasn't the massive technological breakthroughs on Fire and Ash, this time around things needed to be more precise and were more expensive. I thought Way of Water would have been more expensive because of, well, the element of water. You're having actors performing in motion capture suits under the water would have been more difficult than out of the water. There's the safety aspect, getting actors comfortable working within the water, and then animating water, because that traditionally has been pretty hard to do in the past, and it's an element that usually looks very poor if it's not done correctly. So part of this also connects to James Cameron's anti-generative AI stance. He wants the world building to emerge from performance, motion capture, and human collaboration of artists, and not just procedural generation using artificial intelligence. If you listen to my Avatar specials from a couple of years ago, I mentioned the uncanny valley and CGI characters, and how the brain knows something is wrong if it doesn't look quite right. So this time around in Fire and Ash, characters like Spider and Quaritch have a lot more scenes together, similar to the scenes in The Way of Water. The only difference this time around is I thought Quaritch looked really real. The rendering, like just the way a purely digital character looks now, looks more lifelike and more indistinguishable from the actual real actor in the same scene. Where in The Way of Water, the scenes with Quaritch and Spider, you could tell that Quaritch was a visual effects character, but having Spider being the human character this time around, it kind of put things in perspective a bit more, and you could tell that it was a bit more obvious that there was a digital character in the scene. Well, this time around, the digital characters look so real, like the facial movements move perfectly now, and it's getting to a point where it's nearly indistinguishable from real life. And that's obviously thanks to advancements in performance capture, hair, skin, and micro expressions all look so realistic now. And that brings up the question, what does this technology look like in 10 years' time? When Avatar 5 comes out in 2031, how real are things going to look then? And that also brings up the question with AI deepfakes, synthetic realities. What does that technology look like in 10 years? How real is AI art going to look? How fake are the deepfakes going to look? And will people be able to tell the difference between deepfakes and purely digital characters in a film like Avatar? Because our brains are being trained and are getting so used to seeing these characters now, our brains are going to get that false sense of security that, oh, that's just a digital character in a film. We're going to get more used to adapting to seeing deepfakes and becoming more used to that technology. Is that a good thing? I don't know, but it seems like we are becoming more used to seeing things that aren't real. And if it gets to the point where the audience can't tell the difference from a CGI character from a real live action person in a summer blockbuster, it's only a matter of time before AI and similar technologies go the same way. And that brings up a lot of real world concerns, such as online political deepfakes. Is that going to become a part of the election cycle where you see a bunch of fake Donald Trump or Joe Biden videos where they say a bunch of offensive, outrageous stuff? Then there's synthetic fraud, when people get phone calls pretending to be a loved one in distress, claiming they need money, send it here, or social media scams where they have fake celebrities telling you to invest in some type of bullshit commodity that doesn't exist. So they're all real world concerns that could come about from us getting used to these CG characters and advancements in this type of technology. It is pretty scary to think about what AI is going to look like in 10 years' time, which in a way could mean that films like Avatar aren't just entertainment anymore. They're stress tests for how our brains process reality in an age of artificial intelligence, artificial imagery, computational imagery, and synthetic environments. What are some of the biggest challenges faced with the Avatar franchise? The most obvious one would be franchise fatigue. What happens when the franchise becomes too familiar and predictable? Marvel fatigue is real, not because audiences hate superheroes, but because there's too much Marvel content out there. There's too much content across too many different platforms. There's overlapping characters and storylines that seem to pop up daily. How many Marvel TV shows are there? I think there's over 10. There's at least one film a year. But in previous years, there's been 3 to 4. And that's going to keep going up with the new Avengers films. There's going to be, I think, 3 films out per year now. Plus new seasons of TV shows, new Marvel animated and live action series, comic books, games, toys, all of that shit. There's too much of it. Avatar, on the other hand, historically avoids this fatigue because of the massive gaps in time between the films. And The Way of Water and Fire and Ash are the first in the franchise that have only had a 3-year wait. If you compare that with Marvel, the wait is usually like 6 to maybe 8 months before a new Marvel film comes out. Fantastic Four, I think, was the last Marvel film to come out, and that came out in, was it July of last year? And another Marvel film will probably come out around March or April, which is a hell of a lot shorter than the wait between Avatar films. The other saving grace of the Avatar films is the distinctive and unique world of Pandora. And given that after the first film came out, there was a real mental condition, people having withdrawal symptoms from Avatar. They believed that the world was so real, they had dreams about it and they wanted to really go there. And when they couldn't do it, they had withdrawals. which no other film has really done before, apart from maybe Star Wars. But even the Star Wars planets haven't really felt as real as Pandora, because Star Wars planets tend to have one environment, and they're usually places that you can recognize on Earth, where Pandora is like a very realistic living ecosystem, even if it is purely digital. But the real difference here is Avatar does these huge 3-hour event films and not weekly content drops, which might be the saving grace for the franchise. However, with saying that, Fire and Ash does show some signs of narrative recycling. As I mentioned in the review, there are several scenes that have been recycled from The Way of Water, and some thematic elements that have carried over. Like the formatting and structure of Fire and Ash is very similar to Way of Water. The whale scenes, this loose corporate plot, all those things we have seen before, and there has been some narrative recycling. And that is a big factor in story fatigue. In other words, what happens when the spectacle outstrips the novelty? It can run the risk of wearing out the audience. And that is my biggest concern for the Avatar franchise. If James Cameron doesn't push the narrative and the innovation as hard as the visual effects innovation, the franchise could erode some of its mystical and mythical power. I don't think we can have another Avatar film where we have so much obvious recycling of action scenes and narratives. I think he might have to do something very drastic in the fourth film to keep things fresh and to keep audiences intrigued and engaged. I've talked a lot about Marvel and Disney so far. Let's have a closer look at the Disney blockbuster arsenal, specifically Avatar versus Marvel and Avatar versus Star Wars, to see which franchise tops the scale as their top IP, their highest performer, and their best investment. So let's talk scale, risk, and reward, and where Avatar sits inside Disney's big three franchises, Marvel, Star Wars, and Avatar. Let's have a look at box office comparisons in recent years. As it stands, Avatar Fire and Ash has approximately grossed $852 million worldwide and expected to climb. The original Avatar grossed $2.92 billion, The Way of Water $2.32. Even with the third film landing below the first two, the Avatar trilogy now sits over $6 billion and counting globally. A massive for a franchise that isn't a superhero series, and that's a key point too. There's no superheroes in Avatar, and it's generated that much money, which obviously proves that you don't have to have a superhero franchise to make profitable films. Let's compare the most recent Marvel films to see where they stack up in the box office. The MCU is by far the highest grossing film franchise ever, and that shouldn't really be much of a surprise considering, what do they have, like 25 films in under 20 years, which, if you compare that with the James Bond franchise, which has 26 films, I think, 27, that has been going for over 50 years. So the combined global box office total of Marvel films sits at $32 billion so far. But let's have a look at the most recent individual films of the last 2 to 3 years. We're just going to look at the worldwide gross. The highest grossing Marvel film of the last few years is unsurprisingly Deadpool and Wolverine, grossing $1.38 billion. So a pretty healthy return. Not surprising, that was pretty hotly anticipated. I did love that film. Next highest grossing film, Fantastic Four, First Steps, grossed $521.9 million. Pretty respectable. $500 million is still $500 million, but nowhere close to Avatar. Captain America Brave New World made $415.1 million, so not the biggest Marvel earner, and not surprisingly it wasn't the greatest Marvel film ever made either. The last on the list is my personal favourite, Thunderbolts, and that made a piss poor $162 million, which is pretty shit compared to the other films. That one too was also probably the most critically acclaimed Marvel film in a long while. It was praised for doing things different and focusing on mental health, but obviously audiences weren't receptive or weren't really buying it because Captain America Brave New World came out, last February. Thunderbolts came out in April, so that's a 2-month That's 2 months between both those films. Brave New World was still in the cinema, I'm pretty sure, when Thunderbolts came out. And that's a pretty massive downturn. And Captain America Brave New World didn't get very good reviews. I didn't think it did that well at all. But it's a lot better than $162 million. So the key takeaway in all this, last year's Marvel slate, not including Deadpool and Wolverine, which was 2024, performed well compared to average films, but only one hit over $1 billion globally, which was Deadpool Wolverine. And the others are in the $400 to $500 million range or lower, especially domestically. That's very different from earlier MCU films where Endgame, Infinity War, No Way Home, and a couple of others regularly grossed $1 billion. And I remember that. You'd hear it on social media and on the internet that this Marvel film grossed $1 billion. I remember when Spider-Man No Way Home came out, that grossed $1 billion. I think was the quickest grossing $1 billion film ever, and Endgame and Infinity War were massive. So in contrast, the Avatar films, even when they open lower domestically, tend to assemble audiences across the globe and have a pretty massive finish, thanks to strong international legs, which we've looked at before. So the big picture, Avatar's lifetime earnings, especially the first two films, still compare directly with some of Marvel's biggest ever films. Fire and Ash is still stacking up and still bringing in the money. In terms of business for Disney, this really does matter because it means box office reliability. Disney's 2025 theatrical revenues exceed $6 billion. It's one of the best years since the pre-pandemic, and Avatar was a massive contributing factor to this. Marvel alone has been Disney's most consistent franchise engine since the MCU launch, but the recent pattern shows fewer billion-dollar earners compared with the franchise's peak years, Endgame and Infinity War. Marvel has definitely slumped and has gone downhill quite a bit, in my opinion. Up until Endgame, I pretty much saw every Marvel film in the cinema. I wasn't the biggest Marvel fan, but I enjoyed those films because they were always consistently good. I mean, there was a couple that weren't as good as the others. Iron Man 3 is a good film, but yeah, it's not one I watch all the time. The Avengers films were always good. Captain America films were probably the best, but they're just not the 4-star action films that they used to be. They just don't suck in the casual fan anymore. And as I was saying, in recent years, Marvel films have definitely been a mixed bag. Some underperform relative to expectations. Some are strong. The MCU still dominates the culminative franchise earnings, but has signs of softening in box office returns per film outside a few exceptions, such as Deadpool and Wolverine. Avatar, on the other hand, is still a global heavyweight that consistently delivers big international numbers, even if domestic numbers are softer, particularly with Fire and Ash. But I know there's only been 3 Avatar films so far, but they all gross north of $1 billion consistently. And this is why Disney needs both Marvel's library of IP and streaming interconnectively, but it also needs Avatar's world building and its massive international box office numbers and its draw. It also needs Star Wars' legacy merchandising power, which brings up the interesting question of merchandising, toy revenue, and that's a big piece of the pie that definitely matters to Disney. Disney's always been big on merch. Every movie you see comes out has its own little cutout of any department store in the world with whatever film they have out. There's a whole wall of cheap merchandise. Even when you go into more exclusive designer department stores, there's still a Disney section. I went into a fancy shop here, David Jones or Maya, one of the two. They had a little section with all the Wicked merchandise. So that shows the power that Disney merchandise really has. It's pretty much everywhere now. But the undisputable king of merchandise is Star Wars, and that provides a massive chunk of Star Wars revenue, which means that provides a massive chunk of Disney revenue. And historically, Star Wars has been the biggest toy and licensed merchandise seller in history. Reports have placed cumulative figures of Star Wars toy sales well into the tens of billions of dollars. Star Wars has overtaken Barbie with $5 billion just in US toy sales alone, which is incredible, which dwarfs most Hollywood franchises, including Marvel and Avatar. And the biggest reason for that, it started decades before either franchise really got off the ground. Star Wars was around before Marvel was producing toys, and many decades before Avatar. It started decades earlier, it spans generations, and it dominates physical toy shelves. I doubt you'd find many homes in the Western world that don't have at least one Star Wars toy. However, Marvel toys and licensed gaming revenue are also massive revenues for Disney, which often in modern times rival Star Wars, especially with the integrated digital experiences and mobile games that are tied to the MCU. Spider-Man, Avengers, X-Men, Guardians, and Deadpool-related merch all contribute to a $1 billion plus ecosystem. So where does that put Avatar merch? Because Avatar merch isn't as available. You wouldn't find it in every Western home. And as I mentioned earlier, when Way of Water came out, there was a big push for Avatar merchandise, which went back to the first film. They re-released a lot of figures from that. But Avatar on a whole doesn't have as much merchandising as Marvel or Star Wars. So let's have a look at Avatar merchandise. Avatar merchandise does have a strong and very specific niche, mainly with Pandora tie-ins such as Lego sets, clothing, and collectibles. But it doesn't yet rival the decades-old toy dominance of Star Wars or the sheer breadth of Marvel merchandise. You look around now, like Marvel merchandise is everywhere. Every kid's got a Avengers or a Spider-Man t-shirt. Spider-Man's the big one. You see so many people from all walks of life with Spider-Man t-shirts and Spider-Man merch. And Spider-Man's been around probably as long as Star Wars, maybe longer. Having said that, Avatar's box office strength does encourage merchandise licenses, especially internationally. And all three of these franchises, Star Wars, Marvel, and now Avatar, do have their own theme park attractions. Pandora does have a theme park attraction in one of the Disneylands. I can't remember which. And they wouldn't have spent billions of dollars making theme parks if they weren't going to generate money. Disney's also got that Star Wars land in California and that Marvel resort, but I think the Marvel one closed down. Can't remember. Disney obviously benefits when franchises cross-monetize. Marvel and Star Wars dominate toys and games, while Avatar delivers the cinematic spectacle and international box office muscle. Together they balance the risk and reward for Disney's broader fiscal health. As much as I don't like Disney, it doesn't sound like they're losing money or going out of business anytime soon, because they've brought up all these IPs and they're going to make money pretty much forever. Having said that, the Disney business model is strong, but it is also very vulnerable because Disney is over-reliant on pretty much three massive IPs that were all owned by other studios and not themselves. Yes, some of their remakes do make a lot of money, but it's Avatar, Star Wars, and Marvel that is bringing home the bacon. Alien and Predator, they're more cult following. They're not making billions of dollars in revenue. Marvel's cumulative power is, and as we just looked at, the MCU is the highest grossing film franchise of all time with over 32 billion grossed worldwide, and it is by far Disney's biggest source of revenue and its biggest earner. And unfortunately, Disney's one of those companies that the sheer scale of it gives it leverage over so many different areas. It has its own streaming service, Disney Plus, product licensing, theme parks, and now it owns everyone's favorite childhood IPs. And while Star Wars might not be as commercially successful as it once was, mainly down to the quality of their films and TV shows, some of the TV shows are pretty good. The sequel trilogy, well, you should all know my opinion on that. Star Wars is still a massive dominator in the field of merchandise. Licensed merchandise sales boost Disney's non-box office revenue significantly, which is a core business pillar that helps offset theatrical volatility, especially when it comes to Star Wars films. If the film itself doesn't set the box office alight, maybe the toy sales will. And if Avatar's domestic box office doesn't do so well, Disney can always rely on Avatar's international leverage. The Avatar franchise brings constant global box office muscle even when domestic returns are slow. This helps Disney maintain strong international market share, which became increasingly important in the post-pandemic era. Disney's strategy isn't about a single franchise, quote unquote, winning. It's about a diversified IP portfolio that feeds multiple revenue streams: box office, merchant toys, stream retention, parks and experiences, and home entertainment rights. That's why losing one blockbuster year with Marvel doesn't kill the company, because Avatar and Star Wars are still very real performers across different demographics and revenue channels. So in other words, Disney isn't just relying on one horse in this race, it owns the racetrack. While Avatar Fire and Ash's global box office might not quite match Deadpool and Wolverine yet, its strategic weight, especially in the international markets, keeps Disney's theatrical machine firing, while the broader Marvel universe rebuilds momentum and merch revenue doesn't lie. Star Wars still dominates the toy aisle, even though I don't see a lot of Star Wars toys around anymore. That's interesting. I don't see a lot of really good toys around at all, and yes, I do go into the toy aisles quite regularly because I love toys. I haven't seen any really good Star Wars toys in a long time, and the ones I do find in like game shops and things like that are usually reduced character toys from the Star Wars TV shows like Skeleton Crew. I don't see any really good Star Wars collectibles anymore. You have to go hunting for them online, and they usually come with a pretty high price tag. While Marvel drives gaming and digital engagement, and Avatar sits poised as a future evergreen franchise with strong remaining sequels. I guess the most frustrating and annoying part of Disney's business model is I can't buy the fucking Blu-ray for Avatar Fire and Ash in Australia. I just missed out on getting The Way of Water on Blu-ray. I had to find it on eBay about a year after the last copies of it sold out in places like JB Hi-Fi, all because Disney doesn't ship physical media to the Southern Hemisphere anymore because it's not seen as profitable, even though it makes them $2 billion in revenue. So I don't know why a company that is so money hungry as Disney doesn't want to invest in shipping even limited runs of physical merchandise to Australia and the Southern Hemisphere, because it's $2 billion. And you know people are going to buy it because there's tons of fans in the Southern Hemisphere that love all these movies and shows. So why the fuck not? So that means when Avatar Fire and Ash comes out, like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I'm going to have to find a region-free copy and buy it off of eBay, which I guess doesn't directly give my money to Disney. So fuck you, Disney. And that brings us to the end of the very long-winded review of Avatar Fire and Ash. I hope you all enjoyed it, and a big thank you to anyone who listened to the end. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. You can head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. You can check out the new revamped Truth Tank store. I have left Etsy. The official Truth Tank shop is now on Spring. It has its own dedicated website and landing page you can purchase directly from. The old designs are being put up there, so if you check the site out after hearing this episode and it's not available yet, it will be in the coming week or so. I'm really busy. I'm trying to get a dozen things done at a time. I'm trying to get this new store up and running and a lot of other shit, and edit a fucking 10 podcasts I've got that are just waiting to be edited. You can buy all the old designs as well as a few new ones I'll be releasing over the coming weeks. Go check it out. You can also go to Buy Me a Coffee, and Buy Me a Coffee, you can make a one-off donation, or you can subscribe for monthly support. You can donate whatever you like, around $5 or so. I've got more support tiers coming out in the next couple of weeks. The link is in the social media bio and in the notes of this show. You can download and listen to your favorite episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, Castbox, Pandora, Audible, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. To your friends, to your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread it around and get the Truth Tank out there. If you're enjoying the show, why don't you leave a 5-star rating and review? Every review helps the show grow and get found, and I could really use a few more reviews at the moment. And I'll be back in the next couple of weeks with a brand new show, but until then, I'm a Tank, this is the truth. Truth to tell.